say fight back!
Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it. the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton. You know, we put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, you know, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free at our newsletter. Thanks a lot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
One. Oh, I can hear my own mic. So, yeah. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Somehow the tune tracker's not making it into the mix or into my audio. It's time for Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan with us here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman, can you hear me?
I can now. I had a little blank moment of silence for a while.
Yeah, apparently the audio from our automation system wasn't feeding, and I have no idea why. But hopefully we'll have that fixed shortly. Anyhow, the Mueller report has come out since the last time you and I talked. What's your hot take on this?
I just think that everyone should read this, and even if it's just certain parts, the summary parts is more than enough. Although I think the juicy details often even fall in the footnotes. But clearly, when you heard Jared Kushner yesterday say the report was worse than the hacking and the interference by the Russians, it was just a few Facebook ads. It's 180 pages of what the Russians did. They are clearly spinning something. And when you read the obstruction parts of it in Donald Trump, it is very clear that this president was not operating above board. And I think the fact that now we can bring in some of these key witnesses, especially Mr. Mueller, and hopefully, if the president has nothing to hide, some of his other folks that he's apparently telling not to appear before us for subpoenas, I think the American people are going to hear an awful lot, and that is going to lead us probably down a path much closer to impeachment, I think, than anyone had ever imagined.
Yeah, he just talked to reporters on the way to Air Force One and said something like, or where's the effect from what I've seen from the Chiron on TV here, that the only way that Democrats can beat me in 2020 is with this little stuff or irrelevant stuff or whatever. And basically what he's talking about is his life as a criminal.
Yeah, right.
And if he's
as president,
and if he's saying they can beat me if they reveal my life as a criminal, then hey, let's go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, Congressman Pocan, let's ready to pick up some phone calls?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I should mention it's Middays with Mark here, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. The number is 202-808-9925. And JP in Bozeman, Montana, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Awesome. I can't believe I'm the first caller. I am concerned about the schism in the Democratic Party. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. And fortunately, we've got a lot of time still. But it seems like we on the progressive side need some sort of truth and reconciliation. I know that Tom doesn't want to relitigate the 2016 campaign, but the Hillary-Bernie thing has me concerned. I would support it both, but it seems like the two camps, especially on the right of Hillary and on the left of Bernie, are really butting heads still.
Yeah, I retweeted Peter Dow's column yesterday saying, we all need to take this seriously, where he was saying, I was a Hillary supporter, I hated Bernie, but Bernie's a serious candidate, and we need to let the process play out. And I retweeted that saying the same thing. And I got dozens of tweets from diehard Hillary supporters saying, screw you, and Bernie's not a Democrat, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. I mean, there's one message board in particular over Democratic Underground where it's just like, hate Bernie all the time. I'm just astonished by this, Congressman Pocan. Your thoughts on how the party can heal this rift?
Sure. I think one of the challenges that we're going to face is you're going to be up to at least 20 candidates very, very soon, if we're not already at 20. I've truly lost count on how many people are running. And I don't know how many will last even through the next 6 months to the next year, because 20 candidates is an enormous amount. But a number of them are going after other candidates behind the scenes through their surrogates, trying to find that positioning. So I think, my caution, I would say to everyone, is we are as strong as our weakest link. And if we demonize anyone in the primaries, we're less likely to come out of this successful. Whether it be Bernie or whether it be any candidate that's polling at 1% right now, we should be realizing the person we're trying to beat is Donald Trump. And, quite honestly, many of the reasons why we talk about Medicare for all or why we're talking about debt-free college or free college is because of ideas that Bernie brought to us previously. Elizabeth Warren's been bringing some tremendous ideas out there. So my caution to everyone is, if we stay as positive as we possibly can, like we did in Wisconsin in our gubernatorial primary, we beat Scott Walker. If you want to beat Donald Trump, we do it by being unified.
Yeah, amen. Omar in Herndon, Virginia, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Tom, thank you for the town hall. Good day to you, Mr. Pocan. Mr. Pocan, people don't choose moment. Moment choose people. And you guys, you and your colleague have been chosen by this moment in history to write the history, to impeach. History going to look back at you and judge you. The thing is that there are so many colleagues in the Congress, or Democrats, or former prosecutors, former DAs and attorneys, and went to Harvard and Yale. You guys know the law. We need to get this process going. Let's get the public on our side. Let's force every Republican who's up for election to either vote for Trump or be against him. What say you?
Yeah, I think you're asking in regards to the Mueller report, I believe.
And impeachment.
And impeachment. So let me say, this is my viewpoint. I've read through the report, and there is a lot of damning evidence in there. But we have to bring Bob Mueller in. We have to bring in Don McGahn, definitely. There's some other folks that'd be key. If Donald Trump truly has nothing to hide, he thinks he's been exonerated, then he will have no problem with anyone coming before Congress to clear his name, because by his own admission, this report puts out negative things about him, and he hasn't had a chance to clear his name. If he's not willing to, and then he forces us to go to impeachment, clearly that tells you a whole lot more about his credibility than anything else. I think we should be calling his bluff. We should be doing those major witnesses that we need to see if we can get some additional information. And if he blocks that, then we know the truth, and then we are forced. He's forced us to go to impeachment hearings. But don't forget, for us to get impeachment, we need Republican votes. So I do think there is a proper way to do this. And I think the proper way is let's bring in these initial witnesses. And if Donald Trump doesn't allow them in, he tells them not to participate, well, then he's going to force us into something. And I think that is the best positioning we can have nationally.
Okay, Karen in Lawrence, Kansas. Karen, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thank you both for all you do. I'll be quick. One of our senators, Senator Moran from Kansas, is one of the senators who went to Russia over 4th of July week last summer. And I was just wondering if that is being investigated. And I called Senator Moran's office this morning, and I said maybe that's part of the report that's been redacted.
Well, or that also was a public trip, right? And we knew about it. If you read the report, you find out how much the public had no idea what was going on and how much this administration went out of their way to make sure the public would not know that Russians were reaching out to them to give them information, that high-level Trump campaign officials and family members were sitting down at these meetings, that part of the redactions, we don't have the name, tweeted when Hillary Clinton officially conceded Putin won. For anyone, especially Jared Kushner, to say that was nothing. It's 180 pages of report of Russians hacking and buying ads and doing other things to create a problem here in the United States. That is unequivocal, and for them to be backpedaling that tells me all the more we need to have more witnesses come in, because there's going to be even more that comes out than is just in the report.
It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Congressman Pocan taking your calls for the hour at 202-808-9925. Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Richard in San Antonio, Texas, listening on TuneIn. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. Yeah, I just have a question. Why don't I hear anything about Mitch McConnell taking all this Russian money, and Richard Burr and these other Republicans? I think we need to go after the Senate just as vigorously as we are trying to get a hold of Trump.
And,
Richard,
I would add a question that I have too, Congressman. Yes. The news is reporting this week that a Russian oligarch, one of the ones that was part of the Mueller investigation, is opening a $200 million aluminum factory in Kentucky just in time for the election. New jobs for Mitch McConnell's district or state.
Well, and I'll tell you, again, I really encourage people. It is a long read. It's not, I had a couple of colleagues say, I'm going to put 3 hours aside to read it. It is not a 3-hour read. It's over 400 pages. And if you read it with the footnotes, which I think are really crucial, so you have to every time go down and check to see if the footnotes got some interesting additional information. It's a long read, but there are some summary parts. I think everyone should do this because it will provide so much more information. When you look at the Russian involvement and the number of different ways that they tried to get at Donald Trump to get information, and how Donald Trump tried to capitalize on contacts for his business's sake, it just leads to enough questions that we need to bring more people in to answer what Robert Mueller didn't get. Don't forget, Robert Mueller didn't talk to Donald Trump. He didn't talk to some of the Russians that were involved. In some cases, when he did, it was when other people like Manafort or others lied to him, lied to Mueller during the report. there is so much more, I think, that is out there, and when the American people hear about it, it is impossible to agree with what Trump and Jared Kushner and others are trying to put out about this, and it will fully expose them. So, whether it be the Senate, as Richard's bringing up, or others, I think I really encourage people to at least read the summarized parts of the report, and you will get a lot of information that is very useful as you talk to Trump supporters.
Jesse in Miami, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, hi to both of y'all. Hey, Mr. Pocan, the world's going through some radical changes, and one of the reasons I think the radical changes is we believe a job is freedom, and that contradiction, between belief and reality is seen as what's causing our problem. Do you believe a job is freedom?
I've actually never heard anyone offer that as the trade-off, but I do think that if people don't have a job, you don't have access to the full American experience, and that's why we need to do so much more to help create good-paying, family-supporting jobs. I mean, a job is different if it's a $7.25 minimum wage job, or if it's a job that's supporting a family with a living wage. So, there's a lot of gray zone in how free you are if you're making minimum wage. I would argue you're not free at all. But we should be doing everything as a country, I think, to help people get greater skills, whether it be a university education or apprenticeship programs or other ways to get higher skills that they can get better wages, and that should be our focus.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. David in Columbus, Ohio, listening to WGRN. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Congressman. And Tom, I just participated in a legislative hearing in Ohio on a bill that was introduced by the Ohio House to supposedly improve air quality, but it's actually to subsidize nuclear and coal plants and eliminate Ohio's renewable standards, which is already, our renewable standards have generated 112,000 jobs in renewable energy and almost 10,000 jobs in renewable energy implementation. But I feel like the Democrats have a chance to make a transition, not just promote clean energy, but there's going to be coal plants that shut down, there's going to be nuclear plants that shut down, and these brownfields need to be fixed. And the Democrats should be proposing things. And the state of Colorado has already created something called the Colorado Energy Impact Assistance Act, which helps communities that are impacted by loss of jobs from coal plants. Does the Democrats have anything on that, or are they just letting the states do everything?
Yeah, David, I think when we talk about the Green New Deal, this is something that needs to be have more meat put on the bones, because I think it is one of the big concerns. We absolutely have to, for the sake of the planet, deal with climate change, but it's not a very satisfying answer that, oh, don't worry, when you lose your job, you'll get retraining, and then maybe you'll get a job that pays 30% of what you made. And that's not at all what we're saying, but that's the spin by the other side. What we really need to do is really show how we can still have those good-paying, family-supporting jobs that run outside of those traditional fossil fuel industries, but complement a green economy. And, some of this is really taking a major national investment, whether it be like we invested to go to the moon or others, into doing that. And we can really have the economy transform and put us into the future, or we can kind of traditionally wait for, to see how the economy transforms without it, with a planet that keeps getting warmer and warmer. So I think it is incumbent on Democrats to do a better job of fleshing out this part of the Green New Deal, because I think it's a part that gives the most anxiety to a lot of working people in those fields that see their job possibly going away. It doesn't have to be that way, and we need to be better about articulating that.
Thomas in New York City, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
Hey, Thomas, you're on the air.
Oh, yes. I would like to, I want to say one thing to you, Tom. Congratulations on your basketball team winning the game at the
the Trailblazers are doing well. Thank you,
yes.
Thomas.
Okay, Congressman, I want to thank you for the job that you're doing. And listen, I just want to let you know that no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. And I want you to make that public, because if we keep letting this man get away with what he's getting away with, then it's true. There ain't nobody, ain't nothing you can do against for the law. I want you to please go back to the Senate and tell them that Donald Trump must be accountable for all the things that he's done and doing. And I want to thank you for the job you're doing, and I take my answer off the phone.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much.
Sure, Thomas, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think this is what we're trying to do. It's very clear in the Mueller report that he says the next step is in Congress's hands. It's not in the Attorney General's hands. It's not in Donald Trump's hands. It's in Congress's hands, especially to deal with the 10 areas he laid out that he sees as potential obstruction. If you read this language, I don't even think he thinks it's potential. He thinks it is obstruction in some areas. And it's our job now to bring in the proper witnesses to fully bring those ideas to the public, so then everyone can see. And I agree, no one should be above the law, and that means the president also. It's very clear in the report. Part of the reason why Mr. Mueller didn't explicitly charge the president is under the directive from the Department of Justice that you can't charge a sitting president. So, again, there's so much in this report that we need to get out and make it understandable and digestible, and I think that's what you're seeing, the very next steps happening in the House of Representatives.
Casey in West Palm Beach, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey guys, how you doing? You were talking yesterday, Tom, about the CNN, about all the candidates and stuff like that, and about Elizabeth Warren, how she's one of the stronger ones. And I beg to differ. The progressive base is basically shunned her because she had an opportunity to back Bernie, and she never once helped them in 2016, and she endorsed the Wall Street Queen. How can Elizabeth Warren be against Wall Street when she endorses, Hillary Clinton?
Congressman?
Yeah, Casey, I think that is one of, unfortunately, the worst arguments I've heard about a fight from 3 years ago, blaming Elizabeth Warren for not getting behind someone during a primary. Therefore, we're going to shun her for the rest of her life when she's putting out some of the most innovative ideas. Look, I voted for Bernie Sanders personally when he came through Wisconsin. I think a lot of the issues that we're talking about now are because of Bernie, and yet I think Elizabeth Warren right now is probably generating more ideas than any candidate. I don't think it helps us to, again, go after individual candidates for small offenses that we might see. We need to realize the person we're trying to beat is Donald Trump, and I welcome every good idea by any candidate. And Elizabeth Warren, quite honestly, is generating some of the best ideas right now. Bernie has historically generated some of the best ideas that we now have talking, and I hope that we really try to keep positive going into 2020, and I think we'll all be better off.
Congressman, we have 30 seconds to the hard break at the bottom of the hour. What are your thoughts on the current state of the Democratic field?
Boy, you've got lots of options, right? People are really trying to find their micro lanes to run on. I think a big primary is good. It allows people to realize what they think the best alternative is. You've got people running on 30,000 foot and no policy. You've got people running deep in policy. You've got a lot to look at and pick from, and I think that's going to be good for the party and ultimately for our nominee.
Yeah. From your lips to God's ears. Congressman, yeah, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's our Middays with Mark segment here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. His website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, Mark Pocan.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls for the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Mark Pocan, on Middays with Mark, right after this. Today we're reading from the brand new third edition, the 2018 edition of The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by me, the subtitle of Fate of the World and What We Can Do Before It's Too Late. This is from the chapter Climate Changes, which I did a huge update on over the last couple of years. Imagine you and your family had a time machine large enough to live in no matter what era you arrived in. Let's imagine that you dial your time machine back to 250 million years ago, when you step out onto a fern-covered field somewhere thousands of miles away from what is today Siberia. Unbeknownst to you, the lava flow has begun in the distance. As you're setting up your new home, you might notice a reddening of the sky at sunrise and sunset, but it wouldn't seem like anything dramatic was going on anywhere in the environment. Over the next few years and decades, you may notice that the weather is growing more intense, the seasonal extremes more noticeable. Still, you'd have no way of knowing that the planet was moving toward a point that would lead to the death of almost everything. Over the years, as you become an old man or woman, your children might notice that the larger plants, what today would be our trees, seem to be dying faster than normal from what appears to be some sort of blight or fungus. It's as if the plant's immune systems have been compromised. Long after you're dead, your grandchildren might begin to notice that the rains are not coming the way they used to, and when they do, the storms are wildly more ferocious. The results are either floods or droughts. Insects and small animal populations are less evident. The air is becoming corrosive. It's getting harder to breathe. The sunrises and sunsets are becoming more spectacular with radiant colors of light cast across the sky. By the time your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are born, the lava flows may be settling down, but the tipping point has been passed. Although it was a slow process, it was an inexorable one. The world, over thousands of years, has warmed to the degree where all of the abundant life your descendants could see around themselves was doomed. The lava flow in Siberia, by throwing into the atmosphere a variety of greenhouse gases, had been steadily pushing up the temperature of the Earth. While many of these gases were themselves toxic, it would be their combined greenhouse effects, along with those of the multiplying carbon dioxide levels, that would take down the planet. But you would only know that in retrospect, when pretty much everything was dead. Fast forward to today. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in the atmosphere trapping heat and moisture than ever before in the 165,000 years of human history. We're on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a much different place from the one currently cradling us, or even the one in which modern humans evolved. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, agricultural collapse, they're all taking place now. One recent July afternoon, we had an electrical storm here in central Vermont that was so severe it took out 2 of my computers and blew circuit breakers throughout the house. Our home wasn't unique. Many families lost most or all of their electrical appliances. Larry, a fellow we'd hired to do some repair work on our half-mile-long driveway, stood atop a hill with me a week after the storm and told me how his wife had been thrown across the room from an electrical shock she received touching their screen door during the storm. "It's not normal weather here," he said. It used to be that Vermont weather was famous for always changing, always unpredictable, but the last few years have been like nothing before. A lot of people agree with Larry. Extreme weather events like the 14-year drought that savaged Australia starting in 1995 and the freezing destruction of Superstorm Sandy are on the rise. Between 2011 and 2013, the U.S. suffered 32 extreme weather events, each wreaking at least $1 billion in damage. 2012, the year of Superstorm Sandy, was the second costliest year on record, with $110 billion in damages. During the 2017 hurricane season, Hurricane Harvey appeared and quickly developed into a 1,000-year event, dumping 20 inches of rain over nearly 29,000 square miles surrounding the Houston metropolitan area, flooding an area the size of New Jersey. Rebuilding from Hurricane Harvey alone could cost up to $180 billion in damages, making it the costliest storm in U.S. history. But how long until the next superstorm? The year 2016 set new records as the hottest year in recorded history, with average global temperatures of 1.3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Along with the heat waves, flooding and drought accompanying this temperature increase are melting polar ice caps and in turn rising sea levels. The planet's sea level has risen an average of 8 inches since 1880, with dramatic gains in the last half of the 20th century. In the 50 years since 1963, the ocean rose 2.5 inches in Los Angeles, 6 inches in Boston, and 12.5 inches in Galveston, Texas. The polar ice caps are in an unprecedented state of decline, with sea ice in Antarctica and the Arctic measuring at 1.48 million square miles less than the average 1981 through 2010 average. At the end of 2016, the Arctic saw temperatures 36 degrees Fahrenheit above average. When the mathematics and physics become as compelling as they are now, big business gets alarmed. In November of 2012, the international accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers issued a rather dire warning for the future of business on the planet. After all, if the human race has been reduced to living in caves or is extinct, nobody's going to buy or sell anything. In a news release sent out internationally entitled "Business as Usual is Not an Option," as current rates of emission reduction point to 2 degrees of warming, Jonathan Grant, Director of Sustainability and Climate Change, said this: "The new reality is a much more challenging future in terms of planning, financing, and predictability. Even doubling our current annual rates of decarbonization globally every year to 2050 would still lead to 6 degrees Celsius, making governments' ambitions to limit warming to 2 degrees appear highly unrealistic." The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Clint in St. Peters, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hi, Mark. Hi, Tom. I love you guys. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks, Clint.
Calling because the Mueller investigation makes it clear that, that Trump is acting in the interest of Russia, whether or not there's a definite line there or not. I am also concerned with Mitch McConnell's role in all this. We know Obama was going to act on the influence that Russia was putting on our 2016 election. And Mitch McConnell basically shot that down and said he politicized anything that Obama did. And then there's also the other member of the Senate committee that basically tipped off the Trump administration when the investigation started. So does Congress have any ability to investigate members of the Senate? Like, is that even a thing? Do you guys have that power? Because I think we should definitely, this obviously goes deeper than just the Trump administration. There's more people in the Republican Party and maybe the Republican, like all the way up to the RNC, that is involved with these Russia connections.
Sure. Clint, I think part of doing the process that we're trying to do by bringing in some of the witnesses about various parts of what in the Mueller report expand the issue. Mueller investigation never looked at the emoluments clause, for example, and there's a lot of other issues like that that we're having oversight, also looking at taxes and other issues. I think when it comes to the Senate, it's hard for us to go after a senator. It's up for the Senate to kind of have oversight over the Senate, but as the Senate acted on some of these issues that we're bringing in with any witnesses, you can certainly bear light to that. But I think it would be really hard for the House representatives to go after a senator through an investigation, but we can still bring information to light. And there's so much information that can still come to light that wasn't in the Mueller report that's related to it that I think would be certainly pertinent and important to bring out.
Don in Bryant, South Dakota. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, guys. I was wondering, when you're doing these congressional hearings and you deliver subpoenas, is there any power at all to where you can go out there and just throw these guys in jail for defying the subpoena? All they do is stop, and they don't do anything. So we sit here with our thumb in our ears, and we don't get anything done.
Yeah, Don, I think we're at the stage right now where we're just starting to put subpoenas out, and we're just starting to enforce laws like asking for the tax records and finding out whether or not individuals in the Trump administration or others are going to comply. There's contempt of Congress. There's all sorts of other things that we can do once people start to not, actually do what they're supposed to. But we just started that. So to say that we're sitting waiting and nothing is happening, I guess I have a little different perspective is that we're putting these subpoenas out. We're asking for them to come. We need to get response back from them. They've been given a fair amount of time in many cases. I think now there's an extension till early May on the taxes. But at that point, if they don't do it, we can do all sorts of things, ranging from impeachment of a cabinet secretary to censure to contempt of Congress to a lot of other measures. So I would argue just sit tight. I think there's more to happen in a multitude of these subpoenas.
Bob in Kalispell, Montana. Bob, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Greetings, Professor. Mr. Pocan, I'm glad to talk to you guys. Listen, I'm an old veteran, disabled veteran. I spent 15 years living down in southern Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize. So I kind of view some of these things through a different eye. Pardon me. Things ganged up on me. My mom died, and Barack Obama became the candidate. So I came home. And it seems like now that wonderful new sunshiny world is going down the tubes. And the House is holding a hearing and getting a witness in about every 3 months.
Bob, what's your point or your question?
Well, we need to step up the pace. I think by declaring an actual impeachment hearing, we will get more compliance from a number of these areas. That's my total point.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, Bob, and I think more people will be open to impeachment if we first show that the president is not exonerated, that he's hiding something, that he doesn't want people to testify. And I think it's important for us to do that aspect for a little bit before you get to impeachment. If he doesn't do it, he forces us to go to impeachment. But people will understand a whole lot more about Donald Trump's so-called exoneration when he's trying to hide everything and not appear before Congress and encouraging other people not to appear before Congress. So I think this is an important step towards an overall effort.
Alice in Gays Mill, Wisconsin. Hey, Alice, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning. Representative Pocan, you were one of the first members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress, who gave a statement on the Perez fix of the superdelegate issue. Mm-hmm. And you please disabuse me of this notion, but I'm convinced that this is part of another plan to rig the 2020 primaries by the encouragement of all these candidates to run, because I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's probably part of the plan. It'll be impossible for any one candidate to receive at least 50% of the vote with that many candidates in the primary. And so I think that this fix of the superdelegate situation is a fix.
Is your concern, Alice, because the superdelegates actually get to vote on the second round?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, Congressman?
Yeah, also there's a few things I think that make it different this time, and you're right. I spoke out early against the superdelegate process that we had, and I'm glad to see that it was Bernie folks that were involved in the reform of the process as well. So, last time by now, a good chunk of people already were committed to Hillary Clinton. There is no other candidate running that fits that category, where there's people that would commit that would be in that so-called superdelegate status. And second, the reason there's so many candidates running is because Donald Trump is such a train wreck. And if Donald Trump can become president, heck, anyone can become president, and suddenly 20 people are deciding that they might be able to qualify based on that experience. So I don't think there's anything that's happening on behalf of the DNC to try to circumvent the process of letting people across the states elect whoever's going to be the nominee. I think this is just a natural output of having Donald Trump be the president and being such an awful one, and the fact that we don't have the same number of people backing any individual candidate who might fall in that superdelegate category at this point like we did 4 years ago also dispels that myth a bit, Alice. So I think you can rest assured that that's not happening.
Laura in Watertown, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman Pocan. It's such an honor to talk to both of you. I've never called in before, so bear with me here. I am interested in medical marijuana. Here in Wisconsin, I'm concerned that, we did finally get a Democratic governor, in with this last election, but unfortunately we still have Republicans running things, and I think they're being a bit closed-minded to legalization of marijuana, and I'm thinking we could just even start with medical to begin with. For people like myself that are living in chronic pain every day, I'm opiate dependent. I'm not addicted, but I would love to not have to take that for pain. Unfortunately, that's what's legal, and marijuana isn't. So I'm just wondering if maybe we could do this at a federal level, and where are things as far as that goes?
Yeah, Laura, so there are a couple things I think the federal level we're going to do around marijuana. One, right now, out of the legal businesses in many states, over 30 states, I think, have medical marijuana, and a number now have outright legalization. They still can't put the money in a bank, which is ridiculous because of the federal charter. So we need to change that. Marijuana is still technically a Schedule I drug like heroin, so it's hard to do research around that. That needs to change, and I think there's a chance for that this session. And a legal business that's doing anything in the cannabis industry cannot deduct things like employee salaries and other things as a normal business expense because of federal law, which is ridiculous. You have to make a hyper profit in order to still be in business. So there's a number of things I think you will see move through the House anyway. Some of them may move through the Senate because this is such an antiquated law in this area. And secondly, Laura, in Wisconsin, I was the author of the medical marijuana bill when I was in the legislature. I think you've seen some positive comments from some Republicans and certainly from our Democratic governor. I agree. I think that would be an important first step. We don't want to be the last state to come on board. And if people find this is the best solution for their health needs, we shouldn't get in their way.
Bob in Lafayette, Louisiana. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Helping to maintain my positive attitude, it doesn't seem like anything sticks to Donald Trump. He gets away with everything. What makes you think if we do go forward with the impeachment that it's going to do anything regardless? At what point does the military step in when 40% of this country will protect Donald Trump no matter what he does?
Bob, I think right now you're seeing that 35 to 40% number with him, but I think if we would actually get to the point that you would have both Democrats and Republicans voting for impeachment in Congress, it would be very difficult, I think, for him to maintain those kind of numbers. Right now, part of the problem is the complicity of the Republicans in Congress and in state legislatures and the party itself in Donald Trump. I mean, they're taking this cult leader and making him the leader of a political party and taking all the warts that he brings as part of it, and I think that's a part of the problem we really have. But should we get to the point to get those bipartisan votes, I'm not worried that we won't be able to move forward.
It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. 202-808-9925 is our number, although I think all the lines are full. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. He is, by the way, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and he represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Congressman Pocan's website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And welcome back. Brian in Colville, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
I take you off speaker.
Thank you,
Brian. Can you hear me, Tom?
Yes.
Hey, Brian.
Congressman, I have a concern in regards to at what point will my lawmakers of my country start holding people accountable that are witnesses to some of the criminal activities that are taking place. And an example I'll use is Jared Kushner's interview yesterday with the Time Top 100, admitting to corresponding with the Khashoggi murder suspects. And also when Paul Ryan and his lieutenants were recorded discussing the Russian interference and no mention of it by anybody in government, my Congress lady, Catherine McMorris-Rodgers, says, I can't believe nobody's not saying anything about it. And at the end of this recording, Paul Ryan says, hey, this conversation didn't take place.
So at what point do these people become an accomplice to a crime, by aiding and abetting?
Sure. No, I hear you, Brian. I think my concern, and I hope I'm not misparaphrasing what you're saying, but even if they haven't explicitly broke a law, they've certainly been unethical in their conduct. And I think that's where, we need to expose that. Voters ultimately, in some of those cases, can unelect people who've been unethical. But, we have to remember how clever they've been. Collusion is not a crime under any federal definition. And that's why when the president says no collusion, he acts as if he's been cleared of any crime, but he knows exactly why he used that word. Yet when it comes to obstruction, which is a crime, we have 10 different possible ways to look at how Donald Trump and people in his administration obstructed the law, which is a crime. So part of it may be a battle of semantics. Part of it may be a battle of ethics, and I think we can still win on that. But I think by doing the additional hearings we're talking about, we'll get to more of those bits of information coming public, and that will be helpful in that long run.
Al in Buffalo, New York, watching on YouTube. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
No, I'm honored. Anyways, I think folks are getting investigation exasperation here. I think that Democrats should be talking about their platform, talking about their ideas. I mean, we could still walk and chew gum at the same time, Congressman, but I think it's important that we talk about what bills you guys have passed. And like the Recovery and Reinvestment Act, okay, I benefited from the first-time homebuyers credit. I don't understand why nobody's talking about the first-time homebuyers credit, because that was a program that allowed it saved the housing industry, because I was allowed to. Okay, I bought my house for like $64,000. Okay, I got the $6,000 towards closing costs, not to mention the home of your own program and the weatherization programs too. Why are we not talking about the fact that the Republicans they're not interested in governing, right? Okay, well, let's get out there and hammer them. Let's talk about the fact that it was the Republican Party that blew the banks, all right? It was the Republican Party that failed to protect us from the worst tech, right? The same party that just doesn't seem to want to pass any bills. This administration has not passed one significant piece of administration thus far. And I don't understand why we're not hammering him, because we're not going to win on this investigation. If we keep investigating...
Yeah. Al, we'll have Congressman Pocan answer the question after the break. Yeah, Al got on a rant there. We'll be back with Congressman Mark Pocan answering your questions here on Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It is Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line taking your calls. Dr. Vicky in Hudson, Wisconsin. I got it. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, Vicky. Thank you.
Great. I'm a recently retired family practice physician, and my husband, James Mayer, and I have been campaigning for Medicare for All for many years. First on a program we had called Of the People on AM 950, where we're listening to you right now. And we also met you at the DPW convention a couple of years ago. And right now we're campaigning using a brochure, setting up tables at various events. And my question is, you're a co-sponsor on H.R. 1384, and we're wondering what happened to the funding provisions that were in H.R. 676. And it really has undermined our ability to talk to people that the new H.R. 1384 doesn't specifically talk about funding the way H.R. 676 did. What should we do about that?
Yeah, Vicki. So first of all, there is plenty of information out there, and I assume they'll have a website at some point that has this, if they don't already, that has more of the funding information, because you're right, that's one of the arguments.
Can I, if I may interject, excuse me, I don't think anybody listening has any idea what we're talking about, because it was all bill numbers.
Yeah.
The high, yeah, please identify.
Yeah, the Medicare for All bill. So Vicki, first of all, what Tom was saying was the second part I was going to say, which is, forget the bill numbers. No one knows what 676 is except for maybe a very, very, very small number of people. That was the old bill under John Conyers, written a decade ago, versus the new bill, which matches closer to what Bernie Sanders has introduced in the Senate. So first of all, that's important, right? Because it now makes sure that things like dental and vision are included. It has a different makeup of what the Medicare for All bill is in a more modern 2019 sort of way. But secondly is there are still strong arguments about how the funding happens, but it's just not explicitly in the bill, because I'll be real honest, 676 was not as well written a bill as the current version of Medicare for All is. So keep talking about Medicare for All as the concept and what's in the bill and why it's important. There is information out there that we can make sure you get, but it should be out in the public domain about the actual funding side of it, the fact that if you don't have overhead and you don't have the profits and you take away those things, that's how you can help fund health care for everyone. We can still talk about that and the merits of the bill in a really strong way with a more modernized Medicare for All bill, and let's not get lost on bills that were written 10 years ago and numbers that people really won't remember. There still is the same great information out there about the Medicare for All bill, and that's what's so important in building public support for that.
Kathy in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. Did you say Kathy?
I did. You're on the air, Kathy.
Hi. What I wanted to bring up was the fact that the DNC, I think, is continuing to try to undermine Bernie Sanders' campaign. And I don't understand why. The only reason I can think of is because he's not popular with corporate donors. But it seems to me that he's the strongest candidate. He's the only one that really doesn't speak ill of the other candidates. I think he's has the most integrity. He's not trying to build a career like some of these other people that are running. I just don't understand why the DNC tries to undermine his campaign and why we can't just have the best person win and not all these forces behind the scenes trying to undermine each other.
Yeah, Kathy, as someone who is a big fan of Bernie Sanders, first of all, I do not believe the DNC is undermining anyone. I think what you probably mean are some of the surrogates for other candidates are out there trying to demean a lot of the major candidates. But you're right, there's some trying to still pull down Bernie. I think the best thing you can do is just continue to put out the positive attributes of Bernie Sanders. I mean, he's been the first person that's talked about Medicare for All, about free college, about so many issues that are so important and poll extremely high. A vast majority of people support those issues. Run on the positiveness. You're going to have negativeness no matter what. There's 20 candidates. So you better get used to that going into 2020. But that is not coming from the DNC. It is coming from surrogates for different candidates. And I just want to clarify that because I don't want to get a myth out there that it builds to a point that people think that's a reality, because I don't see that as a reality, someone who thinks very highly of Bernie Sanders.
Okay. Kent in Hempstead, North Carolina. Kent, oh, geez, we only have 30 seconds. Kent?
I can make it fast.
Okay, do real fast.
Okay, if Trump has decided to drag his heels and tell his underlings not to comply with subpoenas and some of the other
Okay, you're out of time, Kent. Your thoughts on that, Congressman?
I'm not sure where he was going with it.
Oh,
so,
what do you do if Trump drags his heels?
Well, and I mentioned earlier, I think there are a number of things from contempt of Congress to impeaching cabinet secretaries to a lot of other vehicles we have to make sure that people comply. And I think we will do that because if Donald Trump it doesn't feel like he's exonerated, then that tells us a whole lot about where he's really at when it comes to the Mueller report.
Yeah, indeed. Congressman Pocan, thank you so much for being with us again this week.
Well, thank you, Tom. As always, appreciate it.
Great talking with you. Thank you so
Same
much.
here.
Yep. And you can check out Congressman Pocan's website at pocan.house.gov. Up next, Greg Palast is going to be with us. Stick around. And then Dr. Trita Parsi will be with us in our third hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being. It is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyessa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by Four Arrows.
You know, we put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, you know, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us, we just had an hour with Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls, and a lot of interesting stuff, particularly around impeachment and the Democratic primaries. And we can continue to digest some of the things that Congressman Pocan said throughout this hour and the next. But right now on the line with us is our old buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author, filmmaker. His most recent work, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. GregPalast.com, PALAST.com is the website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast. Greg, welcome back.
Glad to be with you, Tom.
So, Greg, over the last couple of years here on this program, as a fairly regular, in fact, I think you're probably our most regular contributor, you've been educating us about the yeoman's work that Chris Kobach has been doing to make sure that black people can't vote, young people can't vote, old people can't vote, Hispanic people can't vote, Asian people can't vote. You know, that's,
and you've got a problem with that, right?
Yeah, I do, and
okay.
that's pretty breathtaking. But now it turns out that he's got his little pinkies involved in the census. Do I have this right?
Yes, that's exactly right. You know, I had to jump Chris Kobach to talk to him the first time because he's always hiding from me. I had to pretend to be a local reporter, you know, kind of cheap disguises and the whole bit. But then he started calling me, trying to win me over. He's no fool, Harvard, Yale, Oxford graduate, and he told me that he was the one who put that little idea in Wilbur Ross's head. That's our Secretary of Commerce, our doddering 80-something Secretary of Commerce billionaire, that you ought to ask about your citizenship status or citizenship status of those in your home on the census. And so Ross sent it down to his experts who said, oh, you know, if you ask that question, according to our calculations, this is Ross's own census expert says, we will lose 6.5 million Americans from the census, mostly Hispanics. And Kobach said, yeah. And so that's what just went to the Supreme Court yesterday. It looked like the right-wing majority of the Supremes are going to endorse putting the census question about your citizenship on the census. Now, I know we've talked about the privacy of the census. That's something under something called U.S. Code Title 13. You go to the census website, they'll tell you all about that. What they won't tell you about is the memorandum to Eric Holder from the Justice Department saying, well, there's also Patriot Act Section 215, which says that the census information can be used for investigating non-U.S. persons. In other words, if you put down aliens, legal or otherwise, now legal may be a U.S. person if they have a green card, but if you are suspected of being a non-U.S. person, the census information can be used. That's from a 2000.
Then Wilbur Ross just turns the census information over to ICE, and boom, they start dragging people out of their houses.
I think it goes beyond ICE. I mean, in fact, Kobach has been straight up front about why he wants the question on the census. In fact, they used it at the court, and it kind of passed over a lot of people's heads. They said we need this question to enforce the Voting Rights Act and the National Voter Registration Act. Now, wait a minute. How does that census question help you enforce the Voting Rights Act? The answer is that these laws require that the voter rolls be accurate. And from Kobach's view, that means removing the 2 million aliens that he said are registered to vote in America.
Well, from the time he said that until today, there have been, 96 or 93, I guess it was, federal prosecutors throughout the Bush administration who were looking into this. There have been millions and millions of dollars spent by state after state after state looking for, quote, illegal aliens on their voting rolls. And to the best of my knowledge, they haven't found more than about 10 of them in the last 10 years.
Yeah, not about 4, I'd say. But you're talking about facts, Tom. You got to get this. We're post-fact now, right? Okay, this is about fear. Okay, that's what they're selling us, fear, that there's aliens on the voter rolls. Right. And according to Kobach, they actually 1 million voted for Hillary Clinton. That was his statement.
And Trump says it was 3 million. No, I've got that now. Now, the argument, Greg, that most kind of the wonky Democratic argument, Democratic Party argument against putting this question on the census is that, say you've got a town, or Westminster, Wyoming, right? So we'll just make up a town. And this town has a population that's like 30%, quote, illegal aliens, people who are undocumented workers. And again, it's unlikely that there's any town that's that high, but let's just say it is. The census, if it knows, let's say the town has 100,000 people and 30,000 of them are not citizens.
Right.
If those 30,000 people don't answer the census question and say, yes, I live in this town, the federal support for that town's schools is going to drop by 30%. The federal support for that town's roads is going to drop by 30%. The federal support for that town's fire department and everything else is going to drop by 30%. The availability of food stamps and all this stuff is just going to go away. And not just that town, it's going to impact that county, it's going to impact that state. And that's just not right. I mean, that's basically been the Democrats' argument up to this point. Are you taking it way beyond that?
Yes. Well, let me mention another fictional town, Los Angeles, where I am. We're going to lose congressmen. It's that simple. 6 states, New York, Illinois, California, Florida. The 6 states that will lose a congressman are all, except for Florida, Democratic solid. So they know what they're doing, okay? They know what they're doing, and they'll also lose money from the federal government. And it's not just illegal aliens. And by the way, when Jefferson put in the census and when Hamilton put in the census, the founding fathers, they want to know every person in the United States, not who's a citizen, not who's not. They want to know who's there. And a lot of that was to apportion both costs for the Revolutionary War and benefits and power. And it was about people. It wasn't about citizenship status, which is a new thing anyway. Yeah. But you're talking facts. This guy's talking about slicing up the voter rolls, and this is very important because there is this exception. If they think you're a non-U.S. person, they can use your census information. The other thing is called re-identification, something brought up in the amicus to the court by the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC, which says, look, if you have census information, even if it's generalized, you can use other information to identify particular people. Your privacy is shot to hell with this type of game. It's not bad if it's what is your sex or income or something like that on the long form. The question is, we know this will knock people out. And I want to point out something else, Tom. You already have a massive undercount of Hispanics, already a massive undercount in the census of black people, especially young African Americans and urban dwellers who don't get those census forms in the mail or don't fill them out or have other reasons why they decide not to fill them out. It's very much like the postcards. Remember, we talked about the postcards removing people from the voter rolls under cross-check.
Right, the whole Cajun thing, yeah.
Yeah, so they know who's not returning the postcards. I got the information on the radical difference. Like, if you're young and black and urban, there's a 500% difference between your returning a census card, and this is I got from the census, than a white suburban homeowner who's older. There's a 500% difference. So we're already massively undercounting the minority population. California, New York, Illinois are already have already lost members of Congress and funds because of the current really horrific ancient system of using mail and knocking door to door. They don't knock door to door in many urban areas. Let me tell you, that's more mythic. Suburban areas get covered. So we already have a massive undercount. This expands it. And by the way, the Justice Department and Homeland Security did use census information to track Arab Americans during the Bush administration after the Patriot Act was passed. And guess who came up with that system of tracking Arab Americans using census and other data?
Are you going to say Chris Kobach again?
Oh, you always know the answer, Tom.
Oh, my God.
Chris Kobach. So in other words, this thing it's already been used for ethnic targeting. It's already been used to attack the voter rolls. And this is what they're really aiming at. When they said we're using this to protect the Voting Rights Act, that is the most dangerous phrase I've heard.
I get that. So, Greg, we're running out of time here. This is before the Supreme Court right now. I think they heard arguments on this yesterday, didn't they?
Yes. So they'll have and basically, except for Kavanaugh on one question by Roberts, the right wing stayed silent, and everyone reads that as they're going to let the Commerce Department put this question on, the Kobach question on. It was also endorsed by Steve Bannon. There's your protector of civil liberties.
Yeah.
And by June 30, we should get the decision of the court, but it looks really bad.
At this point, is there anything any of us can do?
Yeah. Number one, if you get the census form, answer it. Just like when I tell people register to vote,
Right.
You fill out that census form.
Well, I
Okay,
get,
make sure everyone knows
encouraging, African Americans, for example, to fill out the census form. But if the Trump administration is going to use the census to go after people, I can't in good conscience encourage people who are here without legal status to do so. Which is really a terrible thing to say on the air, but I mean, how else do you deal with that simple reality?
Well, I think the reality is that we have to answer those forms, and we have to fight them on the beaches and in the census forms and in the voting booth.
Yeah.
There's no other way to do it. Fill out the form.
Yeah, amazing.
Fill out the form. And by the way, if you don't answer one question on the form, you don't go to prison.
So you can ignore the "Are you a citizen?" question.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
All of us can ignore that question. In fact, if all the white people in America were to ignore that question, it might blow the whole damn thing up for Kobach, right?
I think we started a movement, Tom.
There you go. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Ken in Rancho Cucamonga, California. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Sir, Tom, how are you, sir?
I'm well.
Good. The gentleman that's on came on after I had already got on the phone to get a conversation with Pokem. But I do want to let you know something. Just the facts with me might help me understand how it's going to affect people that are either incarcerated or have served the sentences and are now going to be released or have gotten their separation papers from prison, and then now they want to be back into society, which is great. I believe in rehabilitation, what so forth. But what my question is to the gist is, I'm from the islands, but I'm from a U.S. territory, and Guam is people from Guam. They don't have the right to vote in national election for president, what so forth. But we do have a local unicameral legislature, 21 seat with a couple senators, that a congresswoman that serves Washington, D.C.
Right.
Okay, having said that, I fall in the citizen. I am a citizen. And most people that are citizens, they claim their citizenship because they claim their citizenship.
Sure, and when you're in California, you can actually vote.
Well, no, I understand that, but I'm going to the real generic aspect of I am a citizen since '58 from birth under the Organic Act of 1952, yada yada. Okay,
right.
I'm saying if I want to vote this year, I'm going to vote, or next year, 2020, I'm going to vote. Especially since we got Donald J. Trump in the office, and he's doing everything he's doing to do everything.
I get all that, Ken. What's your question or what's your point?
My question is since I'm not an ex-con and I'm a standing individual, and I want to go ahead and say that I'm a citizen. But now you just brought up that non-citizen adage that I can go non-citizen, and then I can just answer every other question that I want.
Yeah, I mean, with regard to the census, I mean, you can just answer it any way you want. It's Pierre in Brookings, Oregon. Hey, Pierre, what's on your mind today?
First, Tom, a word of thanks for continuing to have Congressman Pocan on. I love how he does what he does, and I think this forum and the way you guys run it should be a requirement for every representative. They should be, made to respond to us and
yeah, it's like Prime Minister's questions. Yeah, but your point or question, Pierre, we just have a minute left.
Okay. To me, it all boils down to this. The Mueller report offers clear and credible evidence that the Trump campaign wanted, sought, and got, and maybe needed, but who cares, assistance from a foreign state in defeating Clinton. I don't think anyone serious would question that. What is still an open question, though, is whether this is still a nation and a people that is bothered by that sort of thing, as we always used to be. And
Right.
I guess we'll see.
Okay. Yeah.
That's it. That's all I got.
I agree with you, Pierre, and I think you said it very well. This is
this is the thing that hasn't broken through, it seems. And this is the thing that Donald Trump is most afraid of, right? When we heard that Kirstjen Nielsen couldn't bring up the possibility of Russians interfering in the 2020 election in front of Donald Trump because he doesn't like to hear about that, because it questions the legitimacy of his presidency, that should tell you everything. He thinks he's an illegitimate president. He thinks he was put into office by the Russians. So, yeah, let's rub it in his face. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
.com/Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, there's a lot in the news here. I just wanted to share a couple of things with you that I think are like really, really important stories. This is actually an older piece from the New York Times that somebody tweeted to me this morning. This is from last October, but it really is relevant right now. I have noticed, and I've talked about this a couple of times on the air, all of these new Twitter accounts that are being opened, or Twitter accounts that were opened back, you know, a couple of years ago during the last election, and then went quiet for 2 years, and so, you know, they now have, you know, like they're following 100 people or 1,000 people, but they've got like 30 tweets or something, or excuse me, the other way around. They've got 1,000 or a couple thousand tweets, and they've got 30 followers, and not all of these are actually robots. Many of them are computer bots, but many of them are actually people who are paid to do this. Typically not inside the United States. That was the Internet Research Bureau or whatever it's called, agency, I guess, IRA, in Russia. But in Saudi Arabia, this is going on. This from Katie Benner, Mark Mazzetti, Ben Hubbard, and Mike Isaac, writing for the New York Times. The headline, Saudi's image makers, a troll army and a Twitter insider. Hundreds of people work at a so-called troll farm in Riyadh to smother the voices of dissidents. And additionally, they have a Saudi employee at Twitter whom Western intelligence officials suspect is spying on users' accounts to help the Saudi leadership. Now, this was all put together by a guy named Saud El-Quantani. He was a top advisor to Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He was fired back when Khashoggi was killed, but he was the strategist behind this thing. They note in the article, many Saudis had hoped that Twitter would democratize discourse by giving everyday citizens a voice, but Saudi Arabia has instead become an illustration of how authoritarian governments can manipulate social media to silence or drown out critics while spreading their own version of reality. Before his death, Mr. Khashoggi was launching projects to combat the online abuse. They talk about in the article how every morning he'd wake up and just be hit with hundreds of attacks from Twitter bots or from Twitter, you know, these Twitter accounts coming out of Saudi Arabia at him, and many of them in Arabic. Before his death, he was launching a project to combat the online abuse and to try to reveal that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was mismanaging the country. You know, they note that offices and homes in and around Riyadh, where hundreds of young men hunt on Twitter for voices and conversations to silence. This is the operation the Saudi government is running. Its directors routinely discuss ways to combat dissent, lists of people to threaten and insult, daily tweet quotas to fill, and pro-government messages to augment. This is happening in Saudi Arabia. The Chinese are doing this. By the way, the Chinese just yesterday sentenced a whole bunch of those pro-democracy Hong Kong protesters to prison. Not getting much coverage. But you know, hey, it's continuing. And then Kirstjen Nielsen, before she was forced to resign, one of the big challenges that she had with Trump is that she was starting to get flipped out that Russians and other countries were going to hack our election next year. And the senior aides, Mick Mulvaney and others, said, no, you can't bring that up in Mr. Trump's presence because it upsets him, because he doesn't think that his presidency is legitimate because he thinks, or because people around him think, or because the American people think that he was only pushed over the top with help from Russia. So he won't even allow a conversation about this. So we're just going to leave all the voting systems wide open. Russians, Chinese, please hack us. The Saudis, go for it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is, in my opinion, something that qualifies as a national emergency. We should be having a conversation about this, too. We'll be right back. Today we're reading from the Polar Bear Expedition, the heroes of America's forgotten invasion of Russia, 1918-1919. It's a story, by the way, that the Russians remember well, but most Americans are unaware of. This is from the prologue, Nizhny Gora, Russia, January 19th, 1919. They've been expecting it for weeks, hell, months, and so the men of Company 8 of the 339th Infantry Regiment, the Polar Bears, as they would come to call themselves, have stood night and day in 40 below zero temperatures. They stamp their feet and try not to touch bare skin on the frozen barrels of their weapons, lest their flesh be ripped off. They peer through the deep ebony night of their dark log-lined dugouts into the frigid tundra toward the south and east across the ice-choked river and watch for it, wait for it, and wonder how many will come and how they will perform when they do. And they wonder, too, if and how they will ever get out of this place, this frozen Hades, this last place on Earth at the top of the world. And then early on this morning, they do come, a horde of them, dim forms in the distance spread out across the Vaga River, some on skis, others on snowshoes, all of them armed, like ghost warriors traversing the river Styx, hundreds of them to their mere handful of 46. Bolos, the men call them, Bolsheviks. Now a shell flung from upriver, arcing and piercing the barely gray of dawn, flies over the village. Lieutenant Harry Meade awakens with a start, quickly dons his fur hat and overcoat and boots, and races to the far outpost where this scant group of half-dozen men stands guard against not only the enemy, but the tide of history. The sergeant hands him his field glasses, and he squints through the misty, blowing snow. The only sounds, the sharp snapping of frozen tree branches and the dull booming of the river ice cracking. He sees them now, coming on several hundred yards in the distance, and he quickly understands that the company is probably doomed. Now a grayish form enters his view much closer, and he peels the glass from his eye. Steam comes from his mouth as the thin outpost is now about to be overrun by a nearer group of the enemy, who have snuck closer and rise like dervishes from their concealment in the deep snow. Lieutenant Harry Meade, late of Valparaiso, Indiana, and Detroit, Michigan, stranded more than 200 miles from his regiment's base at Archangel, Russia, doesn't have to speak as the mass of Bolos descends on his small attachment. His men are already furiously firing their machine guns and rifles at this grisly apparition, all while more artillery shells spew over them and land amid them. But Meade yells the words anyway, as if by rote, as if it's not too late, as if any of them has a chance. Fire, Meade orders his men. For God's sake, fire! Chapter 1, The March to Intervention. The preliminaries began on March 9th, 1918, with millions of high explosive and gas shells raining across the front between the northern French cities of Prey and Saint-Quentin. The smothering of the British-held territory continued through the week and beyond, and was topped off with a continuous salvo from 6,700 pieces of German artillery, which began at 4:30 in the morning on March 21st. 5 hours later, heavy mortars began raining death and destruction on the British Fifth Army, and 5 minutes later,
The advance of 3 German armies, 69 divisions in all, poured from their trenches and headed east, with the aim of splitting the junction of British and French forces on the southern end of the Somme front and sending the Brits in a panic for the protection of the Channel ports. There was an urgency to the assault, and for good reason. With the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk on March 3rd, Russia had officially taken itself out of the war and relieved the pressure on Germany's eastern front. After years of fighting a two-front war, German forces were now consolidated. Meanwhile, the United States, which had declared war on Germany nearly a year before, had yet to send enough men across the Atlantic to tip the balance in the Allies' favor on the Western Front. But the Yanks were coming. During that spring of 1918, therefore, Germany had a small and unique window in which to act, while the numbers favored them, and so the hand-picked assault troops went forward in great and deadly haste. Above the attackers, 326 fighter aircraft soared into the morning with their opposition just 261 British planes. Following barrages, small teams of stormtroopers appeared out of the deep fog and, ignoring the British strongpoints, cut swaths through the trenches with light machine guns, automatic weapons, and flamethrowers. By the end of the first day of what would be a months-long offensive, the Germans had pushed more than 4 miles through the British and were still advancing. In their wake, they left the bodies of an untold number of defenders, thousands of wounded, and 21,000 prisoners. By March 23rd, 3 huge guns made by the arms manufacturer Krupp had been hauled forward and began sending shells into Paris, 72 miles away. 200 Parisians would be killed on that day alone. Those unlucky Parisians would be but grains of sand in an ocean of war that had enveloped France since August of 1914, when a gray tide of Germans had pushed across the border with Belgium and by early September had very nearly taken Paris. The flood was checked on the Marne River east of the French capital in early September, but the war, it would eventually become known as the Great War, had only begun. The Germans intended to stay, and by the end of 1914, a dizzying series of parallel zigzagging trenches, French, German, and to the north, those of France's British allies, scarred the French soil, the Polar Bear Expedition.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, in the next hour, by the way, we've got a geeky science that's going to just blow your mind. Charisse in Poulsbo, Washington. Hey, Charisse, what's on your mind today?
Hi. This was really more of a question for the congressman, but I just thought I'd throw it out there anyway. In the same way, I don't understand how big businesses don't lobby for universal health care to get that cost off their balance sheet. I don't understand why the banking industry, housing industry, doesn't lobby for some sort of relief for student debt so that all those students out there, adults out there with student debt can't get into the housing market.
Because they have most of the student loan debts are not, they're not these loans. In fact, I don't think any of these loans are written actually by the federal government. They're subsidized. They're backstopped by the federal government, but they're written by banks. And the average interest rate on student loans is 6.5%. Yeah, you can't sell. Right now, house mortgages are 4%. Right.
Right.
Savings accounts are 2%.
Funded.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. I thought they were more government funded,
No.
That's my mistake.
Yeah, they're private corporations. They're government backed. Or at least some of them are. Many of them are. I think the majority of them. But yeah, and that's why they're making a fortune. I mean, $1.5 trillion of student loan debt at 6% interest is a mind-boggling amount of money every year that these guys are making in interest with no risk. No risk. You can't declare bankruptcy on these things, and if you walk away from them, they have the legal ability to go after your parents or after your children. Even if you die with student loan debt, they not only can go after your estate, but after your estate is exhausted, they can go after your children. So, I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving from the point of view of the bankers. And a lot of this is simply because of the Bankruptcy Act of 2005, the legislation that basically made it impossible, illegal for people with student loan debt to walk away from it through bankruptcy. And that's a law that needs to be changed. And it's a law that, was promoted by a number of very high-profile Democrats, and it was including at least one who debated me on this program about it, and, saying, oh, this is, young people need to learn responsibility. And I'm like, really? And that's where we're at. Sharice, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Tim in Naples, Maine. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hey, how are you?
Good.
That's good. I was calling about the congressman, but I'm glad you mentioned about the student loan stuff, because what's going on is that Warren, let me think of Warren, and she got some gumption. About the debts there, forgiving the debts.
Yep.
I'm a little nervous. Sorry. And then also, let me go on. She also was not adamant, but she was endorsing impeachment, which what's her name? Pelosi was kind of lukewarm on it. I don't think we need that lukewarm approach. I think we got to go all in on this.
Yeah.
It's really necessary.
Well, the problem is defining the terms.
Let me finish my question. My question really was about he says subpoena. And when they say that and they don't do it, he says there's punishments like censure, and the other one was impeachment. And I'm kind of curious as to how is that really scary for these people? Are they are the Democrats going to go full throttle and do it? And additionally, are the Republicans going to be frightened by those threats of impeachment and censure?
If you're subpoenaed to appear before Congress and you refuse to take the subpoena, and this is apparently happening today with I believe, with the Judiciary Committee, then you can be held in contempt of Congress. And contempt of Congress is a crime for which you can go to jail. That's the thing. That is where Congress has their leverage, and hopefully they will use it. I think that they should be rapidly moving to put some of these people in jail who are refusing to respond. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to delve in to some more details about Medicare for All, some of which are beginning to be discussed in the business news sites. And that's what will happen to the for-profit health insurance companies, because, as Bernie Sanders has pointed out, they're going to go the way of the dodo. They're not going to be here anymore.
So what happened to all those people who worked at the 1,000-plus, what's the name of the chain that you could rent a DVD at? Blockbuster, at the Blockbuster stores, right. What happened to all those people who worked at those Blockbuster stores when Netflix came along?
I don't know.
They found other jobs, Paul.
I said maybe they're flipping burgers or something.
Yeah.
Here's the point that I'm trying to make. Aetna, which is one of the largest health insurance companies, no longer exists because it was bought by CVS. So people who are questioning, kind of like what you said, what happened to these people? Well, what happened to the people from Aetna? Aetna is no longer traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It was bought for $73 billion, and that all wrapped up by the end of last year. I think if we talk about Medicare for All as having a big component as a merger and acquisition, and the shareholders will be compensated, and the people will move on.
The shareholders were not compensated when Netflix ate the lunch of Blockbuster. The shareholders were not compensated when the buggy whip manufacturers had their lunch eaten by the car manufacturers. This is evolution, Paul. This is just what happens. Things change. Medicare will be expanding, or Medicaid, however it happens, will be expanding radically. They'll have to hire lots and lots of people who know how to process claim forms. And a lot of those people right now are working for Aetna and for United Healthcare and whatnot. And there will be job opportunities for them. But, times change. We just have to accept that. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Two points. I had hoped to raise this with the congressman, but when he said that anybody can get elected president if Trump can get elected president, I thought, well, yeah. Anybody can get elected if they got Chris Kovach and 50-state crosscheck behind them.
And hundreds of millions of dollars in billionaire money being poured into the elections down ticket that cause your voters to turn out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Only this time, but by the way, I think the biggest story that nobody's talking about, George, that I've seen this week is that 2 days ago there was a small report in the Washington Post that a group of billionaires who last time around, and I'm assuming this is the Koch network, although I don't recall specifically, but that a group of billionaires who last time around did not throw any money at Donald Trump this time are totally on board. He gave them their tax break. They want more tax breaks. He's giving them deregulation. They want more deregulation, more poisoned air, more poisoned water, more poisoned planet, more profits for them. And so they are going all in. They're going to throw hundreds of millions of dollars behind Donald Trump in the 2020 election. This is going to be a big deal. But anyhow, back to you, George.
That absolutely proves the point that besides cross-check, that if you got Citizens United and McCutcheon and all that unlimited money behind you, and if you've got a Republican Party that has assiduously for 40 years pursued governorships, Secretary of State's offices, and legislatures for purposes of gerrymandering and eliminating all Democratic voters that they can get rid of, yeah, you too can be president. And if you've got, thousands and thousands of bots and human actors on the social media from democracies like Romania, Bulgaria, Russia, and
Saudi Arabia,
China, and Saudi Arabia, yeah, you too can get elected president. The other thing I'd like to point out, and I beg all my fellow Democrats to take this to heart. This is a lesson that we all should have learned long before 2016, and we learned it the hard way again in 2016. The longest-lasting legacy of any presidency is the judges. And I'm a Bernie bro. I was all in for Bernie, but I was happy to vote for Hillary when she got the nomination. I would much rather have had Hillary nominating judges than Trump.
Yeah.
So everybody out there who still has a burr under your saddle about this, you've got to get over it.
Yeah, I agree. On both sides, people have to get over it. Peter Dow wrote an absolutely brilliant piece, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I think it was published in The Nation, about how he had been a Hillary person, a Hillary partisan in the last election, and basically hated Bernie. And what he's looking at right now is that Bernie is the front runner in the Democratic Party, or at least one of two, and he may well be our candidate. And we need to get over that, right? You argue for your favorite candidate, but at the end of the day, being sabotaged by people who are still PO'd that Bernie had the temerity to challenge Hillary 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, is crazy. It's just crazy. George, thank you. Dave in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Listen, I was 59 when Obama got elected, and it was all hopeful and everything, and now I'm 70. And it seems like they've taken the Republican Party, tried to take him down. But anyway, I tell my grandchildren, I told my children, anyone could be president. And am I going to have to change that to say, well, only if you're honest and if you show your tax returns? There seems to be there's going to be a disclaimer when I say anyone could be president now, because look at what we've got now.
Yeah.
With no accountability.
Well, and there's a disclaimer just on the concept of the presidency now, because we've got a guy who lost by 3 million votes. The 80,000 votes that made him president spread over 4 states may well not even be actual votes. They might have been hacked votes, and and they may only exist as a consequence of voter suppression in those states. And and to the extent that some people may have gone out and voted for Trump because they thought that, the Pope actually endorsed him and they're good Catholics. That was one of the things that was pushed out by the Internet Research Agency, the Russian troll farm, was this meme that the Pope had endorsed Trump. I mean, it's like he is an illegitimate president. We just need to acknowledge that, recognize that, and point it out. And by the way, if the tables were turned, if Hillary Clinton got elected the same way, the Republicans would be talking about it every single day. They would refuse to use the word president when they describe her. I mean, et cetera. Yeah. So, Dave, thank you. Spot on. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We're going to check in about 4 minutes with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're also at the top of the next hour going to have Dr. Trita Parsi with us, who's going to be talking about the situation, a possible war with Iran. Really? And welcome back. Ernie in Pleasant Hill, Missouri. Hey, Ernie, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Oh, thank you. I was just trying to catch Greg Palast on the voting on Ivanka Trump getting the voting machine patents from China.
Mm-hmm.
And if them are going to be made by the same company that makes phones that were spying on our troops and stuff.
Yeah, that would be Huawei, and the company that's building the 5G backbone and network for most of the world too, and probably here in the United States. Ernie, the patent that Ivanka Trump got for voting machines from China, made in China. To the best of my knowledge, she doesn't have any plans to go into the voting machine business. I think that she, or at least her business managers, were simply applying for patents in all kinds of categories just to see what would come through. And of course, the Chinese were more than happy to give her all kinds of, opportunities and options. She can now sell those. If for example, Diebold wants to start making their voting machines in China, where it's cheaper to make them than here, they may go to Ivanka now and say, Ivanka, here's $10 million for that patent that you paid $35 for, when the Chinese registered it for you, or $200 or whatever it cost her. And so, it's just another profit opportunity for Ivanka, in my opinion. I think that's what's going on, Ernie. David in Lee, Massachusetts. Hey, David, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
I just wanted to mention something that was in the Mueller report and seems to tie in with a theme today, which is the kind of the warfare between Hillary and Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
Because the social media amplification of a lot of that, also the Russians and the other actors were targeting those groups as well.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The social media that was amplifying.
Right. What group was targeted by the Russians?
The Bernie, like.
Oh yeah, they were promoting Bernie. Well, actually, I think mostly they were promoting not so much "We love Bernie" as "We hate Hillary."
Exactly, but it was also, that was in a small portion of the Mueller report itself, in the counterintelligence part of it.
Yeah, I have not yet had the time or the opportunity to literally read every word in the Mueller report. I've read a good chunk of it. And in fact, I've been thinking that a regular segment on this show for the next couple of weeks might be, Tom reads from the Mueller report. I think it might be fascinating. In fact, maybe we could do that instead of book reports for a little while. There is apparently a lot of stuff there, and well, not just apparently. I mean, there's a lot that I was seeing, just when I was going through it last week when the thing got dropped, and it hasn't even been a whole week yet since the Mueller report was released. It'll be a week tomorrow, if my memory is correct, and I do not want to see this thing slide into the memory hole. But David, you're right. I mean, there are high crimes and misdemeanors all over that thing, and they need to get more publicity. David, thanks for the call and thanks for watching us. I do appreciate it. Ellen Ratner's up next with Talk Media News. Stick around. We'll be hearing what's going on in the world in just a moment. Stick around. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by GoatsForTheOldGoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book out by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us is Ellen herself. Hey, Ellen, what's going on in the world today?
Well, I'll tell you, we're just talking about high crimes and misdemeanors. The president today said he would challenge any impeachment in the Supreme Court. He said there were no crimes by me at all, including high crimes and misdemeanors.
So was he saying that he thinks that if the Senate votes to remove him from office, he can challenge that to the Supreme Court?
I think he thinks he can challenge the impeachment in the House first in the Supreme Court, and then, of course, the Senate. But I think he is not playing around, and he thinks he can challenge anything in the Supreme Court. And, of course, he's packed the Supreme Court with his buddies.
Right. And you got Clarence Thomas's wife who's working for the Heritage Foundation. You've got, Alito made enemies with Obama. I mean, plus, obviously, Gorsuch, whose mother destroyed the EPA for Ronald Reagan, and Kavanaugh. It's
Kavanaugh. What do we even have to say about him?
Yeah, it's bizarre. Whew.
Okay, well, the Hispanic Democrats want a path to citizenship by the Dreamers. Now, I have to tell you, I was in the room on a Saturday morning on 2010 when, in fact, the Democrats voted against the Dreamers. And so I'm not very happy about that. But Hispanics now are saying they have a path to citizenship. They want a path to citizenship for the Dreamers. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens on that front.
There would be no way that would get through the Senate right now, would it?
Oh, gosh, no, absolutely not. I mean, there's no bipartisanship. There's nothing that's going to get through the Senate.
No, in fact, Mitch McConnell, day before yesterday, he said, I will be the Grim Reaper if I'm the Senate Majority Leader next, in 2021. He literally said, I will be the Grim Reaper. Not a single piece of legislation is going to make it, of Democratic legislation is going to make it through the Senate.
I mean, what do you say to that? You don't say anything, right?
Well, what he was saying was, hey, Koch brothers, make sure that the 6 or 7 Republican senators who might be in danger get hundreds of millions of dollars from you guys, and all kinds of support. Helicopter the money in because we've got to hold the Senate. That's what he's saying.
Right, absolutely. And, he's pushing for money for sure. There's
and they're
no
going to do it.
About that.
They're going to do it.
Well, we'll see. Let's hope not. Okay. The Trump opposition has to deal with Congress. He considers Congress partisan. He doesn't now want Don McGahn to testify, but he can't claim executive privilege, according to people I've talked to, because he allowed them to testify before the Mueller committee.
That's correct.
So I don't understand how he's now saying, "Oh, I'm not going to allow any of my aides to testify, former or current."
He's employing a strategy, Ellen, that he used when he was in business. He would build a casino, for example, and hire somebody to build all the roulette tables, and they submit a bill to him for $10 million, and he doesn't have $10 million. He can't afford to pay it, so he tells them, "Sue me." So they sue him. So he then countersues them for frivolous lawsuit. Now you got 2 suits going through the courts. He drags it out for 2 or 3 years, and then the casino goes down. He declares bankruptcy, and everybody's screwed. He has been doing this sue and delay strategy literally his entire career. And his strategy here is that if he can push all these things to the Supreme Court can delay them until after the election.
Well, that's probably what they would do on a 5-4 vote because, of course, they have their meetings every week. They're in session, and they decide what cases they're going to take.
That's correct. Yeah, I think that there's a very good chance that he's going to succeed in getting a lot of this stuff delayed until after the election. And that's going to be, this is the knife edge, right? This is going to be the thing that is going to define the next year, is the extent to which the Supreme Court is willing to participate in Donald Trump's, sue and delay schemes.
Well, I think that he's got the votes right now. That's unfortunate.
I hope not. I hope that John Roberts breaks with these guys.
Roberts is going back and forth, thank God.
I know. He's equally concerned with his beloved Republican Party. I mean, he did the work for George W. Bush in 2000 that helped win Bush v. Gore. He helped write that brief that they submitted to the Supreme Court because he used to clerk for Rehnquist. He's torn between his beloved Republican Party and the institution of the Supreme Court now that the court has his name. This, 100 years from now, they'll be talking about when the Roberts Court was. That's
exactly.
Right. And that has changed. That has recalibrated his thinking. But the question is, did it recalibrate it enough? We'll see.
We will see. All right, the CDC, that's the Center for Disease Control, which is actually run by somebody that I used to be on the board of I'm still on the board, but he's no longer in Maryland. But the CDC has now declared 626 cases of measles across the United States in at least 22 states.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. And,
yeah, it's crazy.
Yep. How are they, by the way, it was patient zero. Apparently the measles epidemic in the United States started with a Hasidic guy from Israel who came to the United States.
Who didn't take the vaccine.
Right, and he was patient zero. And I understand in the Hasidic community there's a lot of people who are unvaccinated. And that's a measurable chunk of Israel's population.
Well, it's very interesting.
What's going on with measles in Israel?
Today in the New York Times, a Hasidic guy said we ought to pay attention to science and we ought to vaccinate our children.
Yeah, well, I think that that's going to happen. But I was just wondering how Israel. Apparently, neither one of us know, whether this is spreading through the Orthodox community in Israel or not.
I don't know, actually. Yeah. I don't pay attention to Israel. I only pay attention to the good old United States.
Okay. So what else is up?
Okay. Now, I happen to be on the board of Reporters Without Borders, but we have just made United States 48th on the World Freedom Press ranking, mainly because of the kinds of things that Donald Trump and other people are saying about the press.
Yeah.
It's really quite unbelievable. And this weekend is the White House press event, and usually we know that Donald Trump isn't going to come, but usually he lets his staff come, but he's not even letting his staff come.
Is that the Correspondents' Dinner? Is that this weekend?
The Correspondents' Dinner, that's right.
Whoa. I remember you invited, we were your guests at the one where Barack Obama just, peeled the skin off Donald Trump. I know. It was amazing. Ellen Ratner, my friend. Ellen, thank you so much for dropping by today. Great having you with us. We'll be back, and TalkMediaNews.com, of course. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if the struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering, beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
You know, we put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, you know, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Dr. Trita Parsi. It's been a while since we've talked. He's a professor at Georgetown University, author most recently of Losing an Enemy, Obama, Iran, and the Triumph of Diplomacy. Trita Parsi, TRITAPARSI.com is the website. You can tweet him at TParsi. Dr. Parsi, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am looking at what's going on with the situation with Iran and John Bolton and Donald Trump and the Trump administration. And two things pop out at me, and I know that you've written about these, and I'm curious if there are, more than just these two that concern you. The first is the probability that by increasing sanctions and making things worse for the Iranian people, that rather than bringing down the mullahs, if they're successful in their internal media strategy at convincing people that the United States is punishing them rather than their own leadership, it'll solidify their role, and the threats of war will do that as well. And then the second is that if we cut off all these oil exports from Iran, then Iran has said in the past, if you do this, we're not going to let any oil go out of past the Straits of Hormuz. And if that's the case, then we're in war with Iran, are we not?
Absolutely. I mean, the Iranians have been making this threat in the past that they would close the Strait of Hormuz if they cannot export their oil. Either everyone can export their oil or no one can. And I think there were good reasons to not take that too seriously, because at that point, when they were exporting their oil, if they were to do so, they would harm themselves immensely. But we're now, for the first time, looking at a scenario in which they may actually not be able to export their oil because of Trump's measure. And as a result, their threat of closing the strait needs to be taken much more seriously. Now, war games in the Pentagon have all shown the Iranians can close it, but they cannot keep it closed for more than 2 weeks because the U.S. military would intervene and would open it up. But that means that the U.S. military would be in direct confrontation with the Iranians in the Persian Gulf, and that means war.
How would that play out, in your opinion?
Well, based on everything we've seen, the Iranians are not going to prepare themselves for war with the U.S. in the manner that Saddam Hussein did. Saddam Hussein had a very strong standing army. A standing army of any other country, doesn't matter how strong it is, does not stand much of a chance against the U.S. The U.S.'s standing army. What can be effective against the U.S., and which is what the Iranians have been focusing on for the last 25 years, is asymmetric warfare, in which they would most likely try to inflict as much damage as possible on the U.S. in the very early stages of a war, in which they would choose the battlefield. It wouldn't be the U.S. attacking Iran. The U.S. would do so, but then the Iranians would retaliate throughout the region and not allow the U.S. to have a veto on where the fighting would take place. Now, their calculation likely would be to inflict so much damage on the U.S. as possible early on in order to break the U.S.'s fighting spirit, because if there's one thing in which the Iranians likely would be able to have a comparative advantage vis-a-vis the United States, is that they have far less casualty intolerance than what the U.S. does.
Unwillingness to lose soldiers, essentially, or even civilians.
They have a very high tolerance for that, whereas the U.S. has a very low tolerance, particularly mindful of the fact that the public is not on board with this war to begin with.
The American public.
The American public. I mean, they're not in favor of this war. They don't even know that Trump is moving in that direction.
Right.
And in fact, for good reason, many of the people who constitute Trump's base chose him because he spoke out so strongly against the wars and was so critical of the Iraq war.
But if this was to play out in the way that you're describing with asymmetric warfare, the way that the British described George Washington's asymmetric warfare was terrorism. You know, the American soldiers were hiding behind trees and shooting the British who were coming in straight lines. If the news reports in the United States are that, you know, this proxy for the Iranians or that proxy or this group or that group, or even the Iranians themselves, committed these smaller acts with high levels of casualties, we'll simply call that terrorism, and that would galvanize American public support for an all-out war with Iran, would it not?
Well, the U.S.
And might that be what Trump is planning on, by the way?
I personally don't think so. Let me address what you said earlier on. The U.S. will call it terrorism, or the Trump administration will call it terrorism anyways, because they've already defined the IRGC as a terrorist organization. So they will be...
This is the Iranian military, basically, the Revolutionary Guard, yeah.
Revolutionary Guards, which is the strongest element of their national military. The administration will use that line. It will probably have some effect early on. But remember, even the Iraq War, at the outset, had 79% approval rating amongst the American public.
Right.
This will not have anywhere near that. It will have no international support except for Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel. So I think the longevity of the American public's favorableness towards the war will be very short. In the case of Iraq, it lasted about 1.5 years.
Right.
And then it turned. I think this time around it will turn much quickly because it will never be above 50% to begin with. This is a war that Trump is picking. This is not a case in which there can be question marks as to whether Iran has nuclear weapons or not, as was the case with Iraq. It's very clear they don't have nuclear weapons. They're abiding by a nuclear agreement that everyone else is in favor of as well. So it will be very difficult for them to sell this war, particularly to their own base,
right,
who are actually very much against these regime change wars and these foreign adventures.
But wow. Just kind of gaming this out. If the United States, you know, let's say Iran shuts down the Straits of Hormuz, we attack them or continue to attack them. They attack us in an asymmetric way. We call that terrorism. We go to war against them. Now you've got, you know, a U.S.-Iranian conflict, but as you pointed out, there's the Saudis, there's the Israelis, and the UAE who are all, you know, aggressively opposed to Iran. In fact, the Saudis are, you know, one of their claims for the reason why they're bombing the crap out of Yemen right now is that the Houthis are aligned with Iran. It seems that if those actors, if Israel, which is a nuclear power, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE were to jump into this thing, you'd have a blown-up regional conflict. You've got Iranian ally in the president of Mr. Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. If Syria gets dragged into this thing, I mean, the Russians have an Air Force base and a naval port there. They're going to get in. We could be at war with Russia as a consequence of this. And it seems to me like it wouldn't necessarily be like a classic world war, because Europe is going to be standing on the sidelines going, this ain't our fight. But, you know, could this lead us to a war with Russia?
I think we'll have to take several steps before it gets into a war with Russia. But I think the idea that this will be a regional war that would involve many of the other countries and will involve Hezbollah and other actors is very likely. Because if there actually comes to a real military confrontation, the Iranian strategy is going to enlarge the war. Right. It's going to be to enlarge the war, because that's where they most likely have a capacity of being able to win the war, not in the sense of defeating the United States militarily, but in the sense of getting the United States to give up on the war.
Right, right. Giving us enough of a bloody nose that we pull out like we did in Vietnam. What about the Trump policy? So, number one, it appears that the Trump policy is trying to drive us into a war. I personally believe that Donald Trump is doing that for the same reason that in 2010, when Barack Obama was president, and at the beginning of the the cycle for the 2012 election, Donald Trump tweeted out, expect Obama, I'm paraphrasing from memory, expect Obama to start a war somewhere soon because, you know, there's an election coming. So Donald Trump clearly knows that presidents during time of war are more easily reelected. This was something George W. Bush told his biographer in 1999, that if he got elected president, he was going to have a war with Iraq, and he was going to make sure it lasted longer than his daddy's war did, so he'd get reelected. And he did. It seems to me that Trump is trying to do this as part of an election strategy. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Well, let's just stop right there. What are your thoughts on that?
I personally, and this is my impression, I can't say that I have an insider information on this, but I actually don't think Trump himself actually wants a war. I think he is being fooled into thinking that this is an effective negotiating strategy.
But people like Bolton wants a war, doesn't he? I mean, Bolton's been cheerleading wars for decades.
Exactly. So Trump himself doesn't want it, I think. He thinks this will bring him leverage for a negotiation in which the Iranians capitulate. But Bolton, Pompeo, and Brian Hook and others in the administration, the people that Trump has surrounded himself with, they do want a war. And they realize that the sanctions path and the escalation path will get them a war. It will not get them a negotiation.
Wow.
And this is where they're essentially tricking Trump into believing this, and he's not probably a terribly difficult person to trick.
Yeah.
I don't think he calculates that this will be good for his re-election. Remember, when he was saying that back in 2010 was before he ran his own campaign, and he ran his campaign very much against the forever wars.
Yeah.
And he knows that he has a lot of support in the public when he says those things, when he's critical of Iraq.
Trita,
that doesn't mean that he may not change his mind and actually try to play that card. It could very well happen.
Yeah, we have just a little less than a minute before we're going to hit a hard break here. To what extent do you think it's possible that Trump might back away from that? I mean, how does this play out if Trump and his advisors are at odds on this?
In Syria, we saw that once he kind of got suspicious of what they were doing, he moved quickly and said, we're going to withdraw Syria. But then we also saw that Pompeo and Bolton were successful in walking that back. So, I mean, that's part of the problem that exists right now, that there's a president that has instincts that are suspicious of war, suspicious of regime change, but he has surrounded himself with neoconservative advisors who are just taking advantage of him and who are constantly pushing for much, much more bellicose policies under his nose.
Yeah, this is a remarkable issue that is not getting anything close to the attention that it should be in the American press. It just shocks me that it's not. Dr. Trita Parsi, professor at Georgetown University, thank you so much for being with us, sir. Great talking with you. His most recent book, Losing an Enemy, Obama, Iran, and the Triumph of Diplomacy. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program coming up on it's a little past 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Don in Linwood, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Don, what's up?
Oh, yeah. Since the right to the right to vote has become a huge issue in the campaign for Bernie.
Well, I think it's a small issue, but but CNN certainly, wanted to focus on it. Their producers, that was totally weird. They thought they could get a Michael Dukakis moment. Anyhow, back to you, Don. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're really coming after Bernie, and I have a suggestion. I think Bernie should double down and change just one word. And I think that if he changed one word and everybody fell in on it, it would make a huge difference. And that one word is not the right to vote, but we have the duty to vote. So even if you're in prison on death row, this would go for every single American citizen.
Right.
It's your duty to vote. And even if you were on death row, the last duty would be to vote. in the name of democracy.
That's a huge reframe, Don. That's brilliant.
Thank you. That's all I had to say.
Okay, well, boy, I'm going to chew on that for a while. In fact, I'm writing a book about the Republican war on voting, and that's a frame that I need to use. Don, thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's great to hear from you, and very, very insightful. Wayne in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey, Wayne, what's up? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
You're welcome. Thanks. I have a suggestion for breaking the executive privilege ban on the Mueller hearings.
Right.
I have. They want to get McGahn to testify first, but I'm suggesting they can break his ban and show his, the weak bully that he is by inviting Mike Flynn and maybe Richard Yates. Because you remember a couple months ago, the sentencing judge for the Flynn trial said, "Mr. Flynn, if you expect leniency, you haven't cooperated enough to the Mueller hearing or the investigation, and that you go back to the drawing boards and find ways to cooperate." And Chairman Nadler or Schiff can invite him in so the judge can see that he's cooperating more with the Mueller report and ignore Trump's executive ban. And they could have him come in this week if they wanted to.
Well, Don McGahn is working for a private law firm now, and I think it's Jones Day. I could be wrong, but and in fact, it's a private law firm that Trump had hired to do some things, and he just fired a couple days ago because Don McGahn works there. So I would guess that McGahn would be just as inclined to want to get out in the public and speak his truth as Mike Flynn might.
Well,
I mean, I'm not saying that your idea isn't a good idea, but I think McGahn is going to go along with this too.
Well, my point is that Trump has a blanket ban, and he thinks it's going to hold, and he's going to delay and drag his feet.
Right.
But they could ask Flynn to come this week, and he's worried about getting a stiffer sentence.
Right.
And I think that Richard Yates is yet to be sentenced, and he's going to do everything he can to cooperate. And he could even mention McGahn in his testimony, and further move the ball along and convincing the public.
Those are all good points, Wayne. Those are all excellent points. Hopefully one of the Democrats is listening. Wayne, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Richard in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. Well, I was thinking about Attorney General Barr's history that's been mentioned, and something just came. I just read something in an old New York Times magazine from 10/14 of 18. And it turns out that Chris Kobach is another one of these players, that sort of shows up with an agenda. And he apparently, after 9/11, was John Ashcroft's special helper regarding immigration. It was his advisor. And they came up with an immigrant crackdown. And they intended to deport 2,700 Somalians and about 14,000 Muslims. And, it kind of reminds me of Ilhan Omar's comments, that we have all forgotten about, right? That they just targeted Muslims after that. So, Chris Kobach, not only, doing what he's been doing about voters, has a history as a hitman like this Barr does, and they just sort of keep showing up every once in a while. And I think we just should add that to, when we talk about this clown, about his other history.
Yeah, the Kobach's other history. Yeah, Kobach also, he's quite proud of the fact that he wrote, Senate Bill 1090 or 1024 or whatever, 10 something in Arizona, the Show Your Papers, Please, that was so racist that it got overturned by the courts, and became actually an election issue in Arizona. And Kobach was the author of that thing. I mean, he's not even from Arizona, and he's writing legislation for the hardcore right-wing racists in the Arizona House and Senate.
Yeah, and well, they still get away with, when Chief talked about how people did things, and then all the Muslims were attacked, and then you remember the Muslim center that mainstream media said was a ground zero, and the Republicans went crazy, and it wasn't the ground zero.
Right.
So, it's interesting. People are very sensitive about things that impact them, and I'd like to point that out, I guess, remind people and myself, when people are saying something, perhaps they have a bit more of a vested interest in the topic because they're the ones who are being targeted.
I would love to know when Chris Kobach went full racist, when he decided that his mission in life was to purge people of color and people who aren't Christians out of the United States and prevent them from having the right to vote. Do you have any insights into that, Richard?
Well, I have people in my family who are that way. I mean,
so maybe it's just he grew up that way.
Yeah, they're born that way. They just, I don't know. They're just twisted. I just don't.
Yeah.
If we ever answer that, that will be Nobel Prize stuff.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm with you. That's it's like trying to understand the mind of a serial killer or something. Not that Kobach is a serial killer. He's just a serial vote suppressor. Richard, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And what do you think about Trump trying to twist out of having anybody who ever worked for him testify before the House and Senate? What should they do? Book Club today, we're reading from Ralph Nader's new book, How the Rats Reformed the Congress, a fable. It's fiction. Chapter 1, Invader. It was one of those uncomfortable morning strategy sessions with his senior staff. For House Speaker Reginald Blamer, the discomfort was in having to figure ways to continue blocking a long overdue raise in the federal minimum wage for many millions of low-income workers when he knew in his gut it was not the right thing to do. We're in the crosshairs, he would say, starting such congressional meetings in his spacious office. Not that his anxiety would cause him to renege on the implicit promise he had made to the big boys to stop the move in Congress to raise the minimum. But there was still background anxiety. After all, politicians are only human, and like many, Speaker Blamer came from a large family that had lived through tightened circumstances. His father was a tavern keeper and his mother a seamstress. Deep anxiety, however, did have one inherent comfort at such morning gatherings. It tended to work in mysterious ways to overcome his morning constipation, the constant bane of the Speaker's existence. Holding down 30 million workers, including among them many conservative voters who, when adjusted for inflation, were making less today than workers in 1968, bothered the very private, self-censored, psychosomatic recesses of the Speaker's conscience. And so, not surprisingly, Speaker Blamer felt the onset of a solid bowel movement. He excused himself and repaired to his large private bathroom. As he sat down in the broad porcelain toilet, he felt that the expected discharge would be ample and prompt. No straining today. After quick breaks of wind, the Speaker heard a sound inside the toilet, but it wasn't from his bowels. Lifting himself up a bit, he looked down and saw the head of a mostly submerged black rat closely eyeing his bottom. "Yow, yow, yow," bellowed the Speaker as he straightened up and slammed the cover down. Alarmed, the staff rushed to the bathroom door to respectfully call, "Speaker Blamer, are you all right? Do you need help?" They dared not open the door. The Speaker did not tolerate any exposure of his privacy, especially being seen in his corpulent native suit. Another more normal person might have replied, "Yeah, I'm okay. It's just that there's a rat in the toilet bowl." But Speaker Blamer was not a normal person. He has had to be super cunning to get to his present situation in life.
Being cunning means that you can instantly sense danger, being as alert as, say, a rat. And Speaker Blamer was already imagining the deriding headlines in the late-night show jokes if he disclosed what really prompted his impulsive cries of sheer terror as he leapt from the throne. So he replied, "Nothing much, boys, just one of those sudden spasms I get once in a while. Sure comes on fast, it goes away fast, too. I'll be right out." Rejoining the staff at the head of the conference table, albeit full of gas and undischarged wastes, the Speaker went through the checklist for crushing the hopes of the downtrodden multitudes. His chief of staff reviewed the usual elements of the campaign against workers. First off, the Speaker will say, "I always thought that if you raise the price of anything, you get less of it. The proposal to raise the minimum wage is a job killer." "Good soundbite," said his research assistant. The Speaker nodded gravely, though when he heard the word bite, he silently winced. The operations assistant counted off the usual reliable economics professors who could supply objective warnings about losses of jobs in recession. The Fast Food and Big Box Retailer Association had begun a large ad buy on television and radio with the announcers' stentorian voices of dire gravity. The K Street lobbyists were already in action on Capitol Hill, marshaling the corporate PACs to make sure this drive was on the front burner, hinting to legislators that their employers might see this as a litmus test for their donations. Op-eds, letters to the editors, and editorial condemnation of economically disruptive higher wages and layoffs was already in the pipeline. About to burst, the Speaker could not wait to end the meeting. "Okay, fellows, you seem to have the situation well in hand. It's not the first time we had to fight off this wage grab. Get to work." They all scattered, including an irrelevant intern who wondered to herself whether paying members of Congress would mean the government would end up with less of them. Paying members of Congress more, The moment the door to his spacious office closed, the Speaker literally lunged to his private toilet, whereupon he unloaded a vast quantity of feces, soft and semi-hard, 3 bursts worth. Before he could enjoy a moment of quiet satisfaction, a shrill shriek lifted him up as his eyes bulged. It was the black rat swimming in the bowl, propelling the terrified cry, "Yow, yow, yow." Again, he slammed down the toilet seat, kept his hand on the flush toilet handle, gritting his teeth as if to say, "On the way to oblivion, you dirty rat." His longtime secretary heard his yell and rushed to his bathroom. Mr. Speaker, what happened? Are you okay?" Recovering his composure, he replied, "I'm okay, Sarah, just more of those sudden spasms. I've got to get some physical therapy. By the way, did you schedule that fundraiser next week for an hour later?" "Yes, I did, Mr. Speaker," Sarah replied, sounding very relieved. Arriving home that early evening, he sat down to a healthy diet supper prepared by his adoring wife, Regina. Their 3 children were grown up, living in distant states, so they were empty nesters. "You seem unusually agitated, honey," said Regina. "Did you have a hard day?" "It seems every day is hard in these times," he replied, shrugging off her concern. "What a great meal always, Regina. Now I need some relaxing reading. Do you know where we put that colorful book of animals that we got as a wedding gift, anniversary gift years ago?" "Why, yes, Reginald. It came in 3 volumes, mammals, reptiles, and insects. Tell me which one you want, and I'll get it for you." "Mammals," he replied. Sitting in his study, the Speaker started reading about the rat. The word rat is derived from the Latin rodere, which means to gnaw. Rats produce litter several times a year with high infant mortality. If seen as weak, newborns are eaten by their parents and their stronger siblings. Over the centuries, rats have developed uncanny abilities to survive dangers everywhere, especially those produced by their close proximity to humans, whose detritus and garbage ironically provide the means by which they prosper and create new nests. Rats live everywhere, underground, in sewers, in buildings, etc. Ralph Nader.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot on the table. We've been talking about war with Iran. Your thoughts on that, the possibility? What can we do to stop Trump from doing this? I mean, he clearly seems to be setting on that path. Donald Trump is saying that nobody who has ever worked for him at all, ever, under any circumstances, can testify before Congress. I don't think this is going to hold up, but he thinks he can use the 5 Republicans in the Supreme Court to basically, get his way. We'll see. Joe Biden's jumping into the race tomorrow. I mean, that's pretty much a certainty. So, if you have any thoughts on that, that would be interesting to hear. But I wanted to start here with a little bit of geeky science. Yes, our geeky science alert. Washington State University researchers were trying to figure out, glyphosate, right? This is the active ingredient in Roundup.
And there's this whole big debate around glyphosate and what does it do and what, who does it harm and how and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things they know is that, glyphosate itself is apparently, or at least the thinking up to this point, it's toxic to bacteria. In fact, it was originally sold as an antibiotic. And it's toxic to plants, which is why it's sold as an herbicide. And literally hundreds of millions of pounds, maybe billions, I don't know, hundreds of millions of pounds of it, let's say, are applied to the food. In fact, pretty much everybody in the United States has glyphosate in their bloodstream, measurable levels of glyphosate in their bloodstream in the United States because it's on so many of our crops. Other countries have banned it, not us. So these researchers were like, okay, how does glyphosate affect mammals? And so this was published in Scientific Reports last week. Michael Skinner and others, he's a professor of biological sciences at Washington State University. So what they did is they exposed pregnant rats between the 8th and 14th days of gestation to half the dose that they know shows no adverse effect. In other words, you start out with a dose that you know you can give to a pregnant rat, and it's not going to have birth defects, it's not going to hurt the rat. They cut that dose in half and gave it to the rats and said, well, let's see what happens. And, of course, the rats gave birth to normal pups. So, step one, cool. Then they bred those pups. And what happened in the second generation and the third generation? Well, this is where it gets shocking. The second, I'm quoting from this report at ScienceDaily.com, the second generation had, quote, significant increases, end quote, in testis, ovary, and mammary gland diseases, as well as obesity. Now, how long has glyphosate been in our food chain? Since about the 60s. In third-generation males, the researchers saw a 30% incidence of prostate disease, 3 times the rate in the control population. And the third generation of females had a 40% increase in the incidence of kidney disease, 4 times the rate of the controls. Dr. Skinner is referring to this as generational toxicity. We've seen this with fungicides, pesticides, jet fuels, bisphenol A, the stuff that's in a lot of our plastics, and the insect repellent DEET, and the herbicide atrazine, the one that got outed by 60 Minutes years ago that caused all the problems with the apple crops. These are what are called epigenetic changes. In other words, these chemicals don't just alter biological functions, they actually change gene expression. And those gene expressions, those changes in those genetic changes are passed along to future generations. This is shocking stuff. It's just shocking stuff. So anyhow, there's that. Let's get back to your calls, though. John in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Well, 3 things are on my mind today, Tom, and the first is mail-in voting, repeal of Glass-Steagall, and Medicare for all. For mail-in voting, I've lived in Washington State, now I live here in the state of Missouri. We have been attacked. We're not just going up against Republicans in this election. We're going up against Republicans, Russians, Saudi Arabia, possibly Israel. So I am square for mail-in vote by mail, right. Because the ballot box is the post office.
Right. Oh, it works wonderfully. I live in Oregon. You don't
exactly.
need
Yeah. Exactly. So the chances of ballots being stolen, you won't find in the back of somebody's car.
Right.
Like we've seen in North Carolina.
Yep.
All right. Second is Glass-Steagall. That was the worst piece of legislation ever.
Glass-Steagall? Wait a minute. Glass-Steagall said that a checkbook bank can't be a gambling bank, and a gambling bank can't be a checkbook bank. And it protected the American banking system from 1933 until, I think it was 1999 or 2000 it was repealed.
Exactly. And because of that, that's why we've had the banking crash. I truly feel
because it was repealed.
Exactly. Because it was repealed, we need to put that back in.
Oh, okay.
I want that to be the Democratic platform.
Yes. Well, Elizabeth Warren is certainly running on that. I'm not sure the position of anybody else. I know Bernie is in favor of bringing it back, too. He talked about that on this program for 11 years.
Right. We have to do that. And my last point is the Medicare for all. Now, hear me on this. I get my medical from the VA and also from my job. basically a public option. All right?
Right.
I get great care from the VA, but from my job, the only thing I'm using from their health package is just for dental. I'm a cancer survivor. I didn't have to pay for the medication, this, that, or the other. The one thing I've always thought about Medicare was ever since I was paying into it since I was 16 years old, that's the only insurance that you pay for that you can't use until you got 1 foot in the grave. That never made sense to me.
Yeah.
I would rather pay twice, take that out of my, so I could get into Medicare. That way it would cover the senior citizens who are on it right now. But I would rather take the money that I'm giving to these private health care people, which really don't give you nothing, and pay twice for Medicare.
Right, pay that in
so
taxes.
I can get in it.
Well, John Ball,
in taxes.
excuse me, Robert Ball was the Robert Ball was the guy who wrote the Medicare bill, or at least back in 1965 for Lyndon Johnson, or at least wrote most of it. And he's on the record. I wrote about this in one of my books. I'm pretty sure it was Rebooting the American Dream, but it might have been Screwed. But I have some extensive quotes from him, and he came right out and said at the time. He didn't say it to the newspapers, but he said it to enough of his colleagues that it got reported in the newspapers. He said, we're putting together a piece of legislation which we're selling and will get the Republicans to support by saying that we're going to save the health insurance companies money by taking their most expensive patients, people over 65, and having the government cover their cost. And in fact, that's how it worked out. The health insurance companies actually supported the passage of Medicare, which is why it passed, because it raised their profits. And he said, but then he said, now once we get that into place, the next step is to lower the eligibility age by a decade every year over a 6.5 year, over a 7-year period, and we will have covered everybody in America. And Lyndon Johnson was all on board with that Medicare was over time, and they figured it would probably take a decade or so, the American people would realize how well it worked and everybody would want to have it. So they just start lowering the eligibility age as they were expanding the size of the Medicare employee, the people who work for Medicare who could process claims and things, they would have to ramp up. This is why Bernie's Medicare for All has a 4-year phase-in. You can't just do this overnight. And, Robert Ball was like, this is the way to do it. And spot on. John, thank you very much for the call. David in Chicago. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. I hope you're doing well, too. What's on your mind today?
I was listening to the earlier segment about Trump saying that the Supreme Court, he would go to the Supreme Court to have them intervene in the impeachment.
Right, if the House impeaches him, yes.
But constitutionally, he can't. Lawrence Tribe actually said already today that was idiocy. But, and Tribe, is a constitutional scholar, Harvard professor.
Right.
The Constitution's quite clear. He can't. The courts have no role in impeachment.
Right.
Now they can have a role in related issues like executive privilege, ruling on whether that's applicable, and probably on some of the subpoenas. They ruled against Clinton in his impeachment, and they ruled against Nixon in his impeachment hearings.
Yep.
When they tried to use executive privilege. So, even these guys, I mean, if they really are originalists or textualists, right?
They're not. That's just a scam, David. That whole originalist thing is a scam.
Of course I understand that, and Roberts is an institutionalist, but, you only need one of the Republicans, and Roberts certainly has spoken out. He's no fan of the president, and he is an establishment guy, and he is an institutionalist, and you only need one of the
at the moment. God forbid something should happen to one of the other 4 Democratic nominees, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is hanging on. But
what?
Say what?
God forbid.
Well, if one of the other 4 Democratic appointees was to have to leave the bench for whatever reason, death, infirmity, whatever, and Donald Trump got to appoint another, then he'd have 6 right-wing crazies on the court, and John Roberts wouldn't be able to stop them. That was my point.
Well, not just for the impeachment, but for all legislation.
For anything, right? I mean, you would have a court that would be back like the Owens Court, during the early years of the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It wasn't until 1937 that the court started going along with FDR. They struck down piece after piece after piece of the New Deal, and when the stakes got really high in 37, when they literally had long-term unemployment insurance and Social Security on the docket, and they were going to determine whether to strike those things down. That was the point at which FDR threatened them, and they backed down. And oddly enough, one of the justices who backed down was Justice Roberts back in the 30s, but Owens was the Chief Justice. But yeah, I'm very concerned about this. I'm also concerned about the fact that on some of these issues, the court may rule against Trump, and Trump may ignore the court's ruling. I mean, his hero, Andrew Jackson, did that twice. He did that with the Trail of Tears, and he did that with the Second National Bank of the United States. He simply ignored what the Supreme Court said and broke the law for the rest of his presidency. Abraham Lincoln did it once, although the circumstances were quite different. That was, the Civil War. But this is something that, I think people need to be paying attention to, and the Democrats need to get ready for. What happens if Trump says, okay, the Supreme Court ruled against me, screw them. I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing. We're going to continue, snatching kids at the border and putting them in cages or whatever it may be. Right? We're going to continue with this crazy war. We're, fill in the blanks. We're going to keep on doing something that the Supreme Court says we can't. How will the Democrats respond? We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls in just a moment. It's 46, coming up on 47 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Albert in Festus, Missouri. Hey, Albert, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for you let me in. I just wanted to say one thing. Everybody sees the storm clouds brewing about war in Iran, and I think that if they keep pushing this, we're going to drive Iran into the hands of China. Because
I agree. I agree. And they're already on the edge of an alliance with Russia.
Well, they already got deals with Russia, but they can't send their oil to them because we sanctioning Russia. Of course, Trump's going to let it go through. So the next logical person to get that oil would be China, who needs all they can get.
Right.
And here it is being handed to them on a plate.
China's actually, the 2 countries right now that are receiving the majority of the Iranian oil exports are China and India. And, right. India's got Modi running it. Modi is a right-wing guy who wants to be a dictator, although, he's facing some electoral problems, but I think he's going to pull through. And China, of course, is not a democracy. It's a communist dictatorship. And both of them can, relatively turn on a dime. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but I think you're absolutely right, Albert. This could realign a lot of international politics and push us into a very, very tight corner.
Yep. We've been squeezed out.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. We're going to get squeezed out.
Yeah, particularly without the help of Europe, because Europe,
right.
The European countries are all, hey, and Russia, by the way, and China, hey, we cut this deal with Iran where they wouldn't develop nuclear weapons. They've been keeping the deal. We're not gonna blow this thing up. Yeah, Albert, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. Laura in Linwood, Washington. Hey, Laura, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hi. Well, I have 2 things. I'd like to comment on your talking about not doing your book reports and starting reading or explaining the Mueller report to us page by page. And also, I have a question. I love Medicare. I think it's wonderful. How will it work? Right now, 80% is covered, and we buy insurance for 20%.
Right.
So what will happen with that, with the 20%?
Under Bernie's plan, that 20% copay goes away. It's just 100% coverage.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
okay.
I
love
agree.
Bernie anyway. You know that, and Elizabeth. My two favorite people.
Yeah.
All right, and you're my third favorite person.
Bless you, Laura. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for being there. And I really like your idea about teaching us about the Mueller report. I think that would be great.
Yeah, in fact, I'm printing it out as we speak. I'm increasingly thinking that this is something that we should memorialize. We should just lay it out and lay out all the stories in it and the summaries and everything else. It just seems like it's time, and and doing it 5 minutes at a time. I think I could probably. Well, I don't know how many days it would take. It might take a week or two. It might take a lot longer than that.
Well, that's great, or longer.
Yeah.
I don't care. Keep it going. It's wonderful. And then redo it again.
Right. Well, we'll have to find the parts that are not so, technical that they're boring, but there's a lot in it that is not boring. So I think it's a great idea, and I'm looking forward to doing it.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, you've got it. Laura,
Bye-bye.
thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Illinois, excuse me. Donald, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It's this war thing that I'm worried about. If I recall, both Bushes got us into wars because they were having experienced problems getting in, so they could return to the Oval Office. Well, I think that's what this guy's doing it for.
I think so, too.
Political reasons.
I do. I think so, too.
That,
it's the same reason Ronald Reagan did his little war with Grenada. It's the same reason Maggie Thatcher had a war with the Falklands. It's frankly, I think it's the same reason that in the election of '72, Richard Nixon prolonged the war.
Oh, yeah. And what really gets me, Tom, all my fellow veterans, they should be screaming out about this stuff.
Yeah.
They're not nowhere to be found. When we got out, we were screaming about the Vietnam War. They should be screaming about putting us in yet another needless war that God only knows could lead us into World War III. So what I say, and I've said it many times, start the draft. You'll see how fast these people will drop that flag when their kids have to go pick up a rifle and go die in another country for a needless war.
I agree, Donald. And isn't it interesting that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump, all the guys who are pushing for war, they were all draft dodgers back in the 60s.
Exactly. I was just going to say that,
Yeah, these chicken hawks. I mean, God save us from the chicken hawks. Doug Feith, Elliot Abrams, all of them were chicken hawks. Dick Cheney, every single one of them. Donald, thank you for the call. Glenn in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Hey, Glenn, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I had a question. On this collusion with Russia, did Hillary Clinton, did she not win the popular vote?
Yeah, by 3 million votes.
Okay, then how did they affect the election? If she won the popular vote, Donald Trump won by electoral vote, so it sounds to me like there was no collusion. She just lost because of the way our system's set up.
Well, you can make that argument, Glenn. You can make that argument. The thing is that Donald Trump won by 84,000 votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and about 20,000 votes in each one of those states, more or less. Each one of those states, number one, threw over 100,000 people off the voting rolls in the year before the election, mostly in minority neighborhoods. Number two, those were the three states that Paul Manafort reached out to a Russian oligarch and specifically said, we could use some help with these states. Number three, those were the states that were targeted with the ads and with the bots and the trolls and whatnot coming out of the Internet Research Bureau or agency out of St. Petersburg, Russia, and we don't know. We know that Saudi Arabia has a troll farm that works. We don't know if the Saudi troll farm was working on behalf of Trump. We don't know about any other countries. We don't know if China was running troll farms then. I mean, there's a lot that we don't know. Mueller's investigation only looked into Russia, and it really should have had a much wider scope. It should have tried to figure out what happened in our election. But Glenn, I'm very concerned about it. I think we all should be. Carson in Alexandria, Virginia. Hey, Carson, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I will take a little bit of issue with, we don't know whether or not Saudi Arabia interfered with their troll farm on behalf of Trump. I think common sense will tell you that they did, but that's not my point. My point is, I think we could take a lesson from, I think his name is Frank Luntz, and the importance of semantics when it comes to elections. I really wish, and for those who've already self-identified as democratic socialists, I think the ship has sailed. I feel like socialism and socialist is too much of a loaded word for the average American for a Democratic candidate to label.
Carson, it is going to be a big lift, but if Bernie is the nominee, forgive my interrupting you, but we just have 10 seconds left here. Sure. I misread that. We have a full minute left. If Bernie is the nominee, Bernie has already identified himself as a democratic socialist. He's been calling himself that for 50 years. So if Bernie is the nominee, we're going to have to deal with that. If Bernie's not the nominee, then we're probably not going to have to deal with that because no other candidate has come out and said, yes, I'm a democratic socialist.
Yeah, I much prefer progressive capitalist. I think that's a great.
Yeah, that was Pete Buttigieg's phrase, wasn't it?
I don't know whose phrase it was, but I think you're basically accomplishing the same thing as a democratic socialist. I just think from a semantic perspective, it's going to be much more effective. I don't disagree with you, Carson.
But like I said, if Bernie's the nominee, that's what we're going to have to deal with. Mike in Hobe Sound, Florida. Mike, you got 20 seconds. What's up?
I'll be quick, Tom. If they do an audiobook of the Mueller report, I'd like to see you read it, as long as it's unredacted.
Okay.
My question is, why are we talking about Supreme Court picks for a president who has 12 investigations? I believe McConnell's justification was there's an important election coming up.
Yeah, well, there you go. Except that it's Mitch McConnell who makes that decision. So I'm guessing that he will change his mind suddenly. He'll have an epiphany. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. It's an excellent point. I mean, the hypocrisy of it is an excellent point. And thanks, Mike, for listening to us on Sirius XM. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It really isn't. It wasn't designed that way. It never worked that way. Without your participation, yes, you, without your participation, our democracy is weaker. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.